it occurred to me that was when you wrote this piece. Had you already read those letters?
No,
No. Okay.
no, I didn't see those letters till later on.
Because you sounded very friendly to him. I mean, this is very even-handed.
Oh, I tried to be. I
No.
mean, I have to tell you, one of the things about my coverage of this case that that I like or I feel good about is that I covered this case for a decade, and I don't think Jeffrey McDonald ever figured out that I thought he was guilty from the first day I wrote about him. And so, to me, at least, that says that I was writing, even-handedly and fairly, because I never told him what my feelings were about the case, nor did he ever ask me.
Yeah.
So it's sort of an analogy almost to the Joe situation.
But you
But
didn't have any deal with him.
with Jeffrey,
Yeah.
I had no deal with him. No, I was a working
Yeah.
journalist
Yeah.
covering this on a day-to-day basis. And what I'm saying is that over 10 years, even though from the first story I ever wrote, I was pretty convinced that Jeffrey committed this crime, he never figured that out over all this time because, to me, what that says is that I actually was pretty fair and objective in my reporting. In fact, given that I felt that he was guilty, it's kind of odd that I a few times had more trouble with the Kassabs, his in-laws, than I did with Jeffrey. On a couple of occasions, the Kassabs griped about a story I wrote, I guess because it wasn't mean enough to Jeffrey or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so anyway, so I thought it was kind of interesting that I managed to get through a decade of this without tipping my hand to Jeffrey.
You mean even after he read your stuff, he still felt
Yeah,
that?
the news pieces. I think
Yeah.
that I'm not sure how much he liked either of the magazine pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the first magazine piece, which was about him and Colette growing up, I don't think he really hated that one. I know Freddie and Mildred were a little bit put out by it because it showed that they weren't total, knights in white armor. It
Mm-hmm.
showed a couple of their flaws, which you'd see if you look at it. Um, but I don't think Jeffrey griped about it too much. I don't think he liked the piece I wrote about him and Joe all that much.
Mm-hmm.
But that was about the end of my dealings with Jeffrey. I mean,
Yeah.
I think I may have spoken to him once since then, but uh, I don't. For all the years when I was writing regular stories, I wrote thousands of words about this case over the years, thousands of words. Um, I had the impression Jeffrey always felt I was fair to him because he always gave me access to things I needed
Yeah.
when I needed to talk to him. Anyway, so I guess I should tell you a little bit about how I started out in this case. Let me
Mm-hmm.
take one munch of this sandwich here. Oh my God, that is large chunks of chicken. Would you guys a deli nearby
There's
or
a deli nearby.
anyway? Uh, I was covering the town of Brookhaven, which is the largest town in Suffolk County, in 1973. Now, when the original story broke about Jeffrey and his wife and children being killed, I wasn't even at Newsday yet. I was working at the Staten Island Advance. We sent somebody by the name of John Cummings down to cover it, and is he still working? Okay, but at 70,
Check.
okay, thanks. Anyway, so in 1973, the Kassabs, that's Jeffrey's
Mm-hmm.
in-laws, had become convinced that Jeffrey really did this thing. Right after the murders occurred, they were his biggest supporters. But Freddie Kassab had read through the transcript of his Army proceeding, his Article 32 proceeding, and he came to the conclusion that Jeffrey was probably the person who did this. So now the Kassab were trying to figure out what they should do. Well, one of the first things they did was they talked to John Cummings, who was the reporter who had initially covered uh, the murders,
If
for
I'm not
Newsday.
his name comes up in those letters
Yeah,
too. Then.
right. So he talked to Cummings. I think that there was a point at which Cummings wanted to do a book with Jeffrey too. That
Mm-hmm.
may have been mentioned in there someplace. So I guess the Kassabs talked to Cummings and mentioned to him about, they came to the conclusion that Jeffrey did this thing. For whatever reason, John didn't choose to deal with it. He was working on some kind of an investigation or something, or maybe he had grown tired of Freddie and Mildred, who were becoming very obsessive about this case by then, as you know.
Yeah.
Or whatever his reason was, he didn't feel like talking to them about it. And he didn't. So somehow or other, somebody referred it to me. Simple reason being, they lived in the town of Brookhaven, specifically in Stony Brook at the time, and I lived in the town of Brookhaven and covered the town of Brookhaven. So they gave me the story to do. So I went up and I spent, I don't know, 3 or 4 hours at their house one night up in Stony Brook, and they told me everything there was to know about the case. I checked the clips and everything else. And I wrote a story. If you want, I can give you a copy of that later on. I have it here. Joe even mentions it in his book.
Yeah.
I wrote a story that sort of tippy-toed and tried to say that they had changed their minds and now felt that Jeffrey was guilty without coming right out and saying it. It was sort of a difficult thing to write. And I talked to Jeffrey at that time, and I talked to one of his classmates, who was a close friend of his, Michael Malley, and I tried to write a fairly even-handed piece. But that was the first piece I ever wrote about it. And from then on, I was very possessive about this story. I'm usually not that possessive. I share the wealth with the reporters and stuff like that. But I felt like this was my story to write. I became very fascinated by it because what's fascinating about the case is that the whole question of why good people do bad things. And here's a guy who grew up being, thought of by everyone as a good person, the captain of football team, baseball team, best looking guy in the class. All the girls loved him. Well, this all American hero kind of a team. So it had that sort of fascination to it. And over the years, I just covered it endlessly. I wrote about, I guess I was the first person to write about the fact that the Kassabs had decided to, since they couldn't get the Justice Department to give them any satisfaction, they had decided to take this case directly to a judge and ask him to indict Jeffrey. I wrote about that. Then I went down and covered the grand jury proceedings when Jeffrey came down for those. That may have been actually the first time I met Jeffrey, when he came down for the grand jury proceedings in Raleigh. And so I wrote about the whole thing all throughout. And around when would it have been now? 78, I guess, I was sent up to Albany as the bureau chief. And now I'd written dozens and dozens of stories about this case. The time they exhumed the bodies to find the pieces of hair to compare, and all this stuff. So we were always constantly ahead on this story, and I always felt good about that. It was an interesting story. So I became convinced that it might make an interesting book. And like any journalist, I always had wanted to write a book. So in 1978, at the end of 78, I became the bureau chief in Albany. And even despite that, I kept working on what would be sample chapters for a book and an outline for a book. I had started it when I was still living down here, and then I got transferred to Albany in November of 78, and I kept working on it even up there. And what I would do is I would go see the Kassabs every Saturday, and I would interview them about the case, and they would give me their view of what was going on. And so I was constructing the case from what I knew from the clips, also from significant input from the Kassabs, from their angle. My view of the book was that it would be a sort of an even-handed book, not exclusive access to one side or the other side, no deal with anybody. It would be a journalist book, a balanced book about the case, but it could be interesting because of the way the case was. And to this day, I don't know how I managed to find the time to write sample chapters and an outline while I was still Albany bureau chief, which is like one of these 18-hour day job.
Yeah.
But anyway, I did, and I went to Doubleday, and I presented them with the sample chapters and the outline and said, here it is, it would probably make a good book. So I met with one of their editors one fine day in Manhattan, took the bus down to Manhattan from Albany, and he told me that it was an interesting idea, and they thought there was some potential in it, but that I should come back to them after there's a trial, because after all, without a trial, there's no book. That made a certain amount of sense to me. Well, of course, come time of the trial, by the time the trial came around, I later discovered Joe McGinnis had cut his little deal, and with Delacorte, which was unfortunate for me because Delacorte was a subsidiary of Doubleday, which was the publisher that I had approached.
Oh.
So Joe McGinnis having cut a deal with Delacorte, it wasn't very likely I was ever going to get a Doubleday to go along with a book for me. First of all, Joe McGinnis had a name in book publishing. He had made a big success on this Selling of the President book.
Yeah.
And secondly, I had never published a book. I had written many thousands of words on this case, and at that point knew a hell of a lot more about the case than Joe McGinnis did.
Yeah.
But to be honest, I wasn't gonna get anybody to give me a book contract the way things were going. So let me take that.
You have bad luck there.
Well, life is hard.
If he hadn't come along.
Well, something else would have happened.
You think? Yeah.
When it comes to money, I have lousy luck anyway. I'm not rich. I have my salary, and I make out okay. I have a nice house. But I'm not the kind of person who's ever going to get rich. But anyway.
So you might not have gotten rich on the book, but you might have written it.
I might have written it.
Did McDonald ever approach you for
No.
book?
He did approach some other people.
Yeah, I know that.
Well, you see, what he needed, as you said in this magazine piece, which you've read, what he needed was money for his legal defense. Somebody like me, even if I could have gotten a book contract, I wouldn't have gotten a big advance. I'm not a name writer. I would have gotten a very tiny advance.
Yeah.
At the very best.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe enough to, provide for my expenses for a couple of months while I did the writing. I would have had to do all the reporting while working on my job, So I wouldn't have done Jeffrey any good. Whether he liked me or not, it wouldn't have been any good for him because what he needed was a lot of money. And Joe was able to give him like $70,000 right off the top at the very outset of this.
Now, did you know when he struck that deal, was that public then? Did you know about it?
We knew that he was going to be living with Jeffrey and that he had some kind of a deal with Jeffrey. We weren't certain about the dimensions of the deal until afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
My fear at the time was that he was going to be filing columns back of some sort to the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner.
Mm-hmm.
And, that made me a little worried because, to be honest about it, most of the people who were covering the trial, other than me, were like local people, local AP, the local Rolling. And I didn't feel particularly threatened by any of those
Mm-hmm.
people in terms
Mm-hmm.
of my ability to write, cover
Yeah.
a trial. But McGinnis was a big name writer, and I was fearful he was going to be writing columns out of this every day, and I was going to, my stuff was going to have to be compared against his stuff. Anybody's insecure. But as it turns out, he wasn't writing a thing out of the case, so I was more relieved than anything else
Mm-hmm.
that he wasn't writing on a daily basis. I was somewhat, I still wasn't sure what was going to happen with the book. It really wasn't until after the trial, I don't think, that I found out the extent of his deal with the with Delacorte. So I don't think it was until after the trial that I really knew that he had this thing all sewed up as far as the book was concerned. Because I remember being still very optimistic about the possibility of a book even after the trial was over.
Mm-hmm. You were there throughout the trial?
Oh yeah, every day,
Yeah.
every second.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't miss a second from that trial. And of course, Joe was there every day too. And the thing about Joe is he's a very likable guy. He's sort of very pleasant and has a nice demeanor to him. It's hard not to like him when you meet the guy. We were fairly friendly with him, even though I sort of had this sort of. I think the most of us who were covering this trial on a day-to-day basis and trying to write straight journalistic stories felt a little bit standoffish about Joe because we knew that he was living with Jeffrey every day. He was practically a part of the defense team.
Yeah.
And somehow or other, the notion grew up in our heads that Joe was probably very favorably disposed toward Jeffrey. I mean, he didn't say very much. Joe didn't give out very much in the way of his feelings. You could catch little mumblings in the courtroom, or things that he might say about some of the evidence that was presented, or some of the testimony that was going on, gave you to believe, whether he said them very explicitly or not, but gave you to believe that he was a little skeptical about the government's case and everything else. And I think that's probably fair to say. I think at the outset of this, he took one look at Jeffrey. He saw how intelligent he was, and good looking and personable, and knew all the right wines, and had women throwing themselves at his feet and all this kind of stuff. So he naturally kind of liked Jeffrey, and I guess would tend to believe his version of things. And I don't think anybody, being human, would probably be able to live with these characters for the whole time and not sort of feel like on the team.
Sure.
So given all that, he was there for a different purpose from the rest of us, and under different arrangements. I was living in a $40 a week boarding house because it was close to the courthouse. I wasn't living with the defense by any means, but I got my access to Jeffrey when I needed it, and I had no trouble getting my story because I knew the case as better than anybody there because I've been covering it for so long. So it was not a problem for me to cover the trial. Anyway, after the trial, I remember Joe and I flew back north together. I still wasn't certain exactly where Joe was coming from, but when I did ultimately find out that he was going to write a book, I decided I was going to continue trying to write my book anyway. And I continued working on sample chapters and the whole routine as I was when I was still Albany bureau chief, and I can't imagine. I must have really wanted to write this book. Excuse me, in order to do that, because it's such a hard job being Albany bureau chief, and it takes up so much of your time. I can't imagine how I'd come home from that, sit at my desk, and listen to tapes of Freddie and Mildred and transcribe them. I have dozens of tapes from those people, and I transcribed them, and I put together a whole index card file, like this thing. It was, I was really going through the organizing process, but I figured what really kept me going was the thought that Joe was going to write this book about Jeffrey the tortured innocent. Okay, and I just didn't think that was true. I'd covered the case long enough. As I said, I'd never told Jeffrey. Jeffrey never asked, and from my copy, he never deduced how I felt, I don't think. But my own personal feeling about it was that Jeffrey did this thing, and it was a fascinating case, and I wanted to write a book about it. But Joe was going to write this sort of Jeffrey the tortured innocent book, and I didn't think that should be the only book written about the case because it wouldn't be to me, it wouldn't be true. Well, time went on, and I kept, pushing my book, but then I realized that I wasn't going to get any place because Joe had his contract with Delacorte. Well, then I gave the book to an agent and had him shop it around to other publishers, and other publishers, for whatever reason, rejected it. Partly because they knew what Joe's thing was coming down the pike, partly because they were skeptical of true crime stories. For whatever reason, I didn't get anywhere. I even had an offer. Joe Namath's lawyer. This is so bizarre. Joe Namath, the football player, his lawyer, uh, called me at some point. I don't know if he called me or I called him, but we got together at some point. It turns out that they were interested in having Joe Namath play Jeffrey McDonald in a movie, which is a totally bizarre concept when you think about it. Even when you don't think about it, it's a totally bizarre concept. Two are more unlike people that could not be. But anyway, so I even for them wrote a movie treatment of this thing, like a 10-page memo describing how this could be made as a movie and what I knew about the case for somebody who had never heard of it. So I did all my things that I could do, and I began to see that I wasn't going to get any place. Well, then I decided to write a magazine piece for the Newday magazine, the Sunday magazine, on the anniversary of the murders. It turned out that the anniversary of the murders was going to be on a Sunday, so it seemed like a great, 10th year anniversary, good time for a magazine piece. So I chose as the focus of the magazine piece not the case itself, which by now was over with. This was a few months prior. The case ended a few months prior to my deciding to write this magazine piece. But I was going to do this piece about Long Island, about them growing up on Long Island and the people they knew and so on. So I spent a lot of time talking to people they grew up with, high school kids, and getting a picture of Jeffrey and Colette's childhood. And so that's the result of that is the piece that I gave you earlier. Mm-hmm. Later on, Joe called me somewhere during this point. The chronology gets a little bit mixed up, but somewhere during the course of all of this, Joe called me actually and told me that he was having trouble because while he had this deal with Jeffrey, the Kassabs wouldn't speak to him, and for obvious reasons. They felt that he was in cahoots with Jeffrey. He had given money to Jeffrey, and they weren't going to be part of any book that was going to help Jeffrey McDonald even a little bit. Yeah. So the Kassabs wouldn't speak to him. So Joe approached me and asked me if I wouldn't help him by giving him stuff from the Kassabs in some fashion. At this stage of the game, I still had in my head that I had at least a possibility of getting this book published in some fashion. And I felt a little queasy about that notion, so I just basically nicely said, no, I don't, let me think about it. But I never really acted on it. So that was his approach to me. And then as time wore on, I realized that the book was not going to get published by anybody but Delacorte for Joe McGinnis, that I was not going to have a book published, that all of this effort on my part had been essentially in vain. And I put many, many dozens of hours into this book project. I said, all right, that's it. I sort of gave it up and said, okay, it's not going to happen. And then I started talking to Joe on a more regular basis. He'd call me with this development, tell me this was happening and that was happening, and I'd call him with this. Sometimes I'd call him and let him know that this development in the case had happened or that development in the case had happened. And so we became fairly friendly. I think I actually even visited him at his house one time when we were up in that neck of the woods up in Williamstown.
What?
Oh, I know. I visited him when I actually came to do the interview for the magazine piece. I don't think I visited him before that. Mm-hmm. But anyway, we became fairly friendly. I told you he's a likable sort of a guy, and in fact, I began at one point to actually give him information. Yeah. Because I felt, look, it's not going to be of any use to me. And by now, I had begun to realize that Joe really didn't think Jeffrey was innocent anymore.
So how did now this is very sort of significant, isn't it, in relation to his case, because.
Well, I should have realized it earlier. I mean, mm-hmm. I'll show you quotes from Joe later on. I think I put some of them in the magazine piece. I'll show you quotes from Joe where he said to me when I did the interview for this 1983 piece that he had become convinced that Jeffrey was guilty by the time the jury came back. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't know exactly how I figured out the quality of the book that Joe was going to be doing, but along about this time in 82, I guess it was 82, I became the editor of the Sunday magazine myself, and I started to write Joe and ask him, hey, look, I didn't get a chance to write the book, but I'm still very interested in the case. How about when this book comes out, if you write a piece for my magazine, I'll bust the budget. I'll pay you more than we mm-hmm. normally pay an author. Mm-hmm. I think we were paying some ridiculous fee, like $750 for a magazine piece then, which is why it was such a difficult job. You had to beg and grovel to get a piece. So I told him, I'll bust the budget. I'll get permission to pay you a much bigger fee than that. but I'd like you to write a piece about a little bit about how the book came about, and blah blah blah. Well, he started to say to me that that probably wouldn't be possible because he probably would be all written out about the McDonald case by then, and probably also in the book he'd be writing a lot about that, which is true. I mean, looking at it from hindsight, I don't see how he could have written anything for my magazine that would have been any different from what he put in the book.
Yeah.
But anyway, during this period of time, I was trying to be nice to him and get him to write a piece for the magazine, and I had sort of let the whole competitive aspect go by. In fact, somewhere in here I have a letter which I'll make a copy of for you. This is from '82, where now I'm sending him information. I'm sending him stuff that I had gathered in my reporting on Long Island. And I'll talk to you about that later on, but I don't think, one of the things I don't think Joe did well in his book is I don't think he spent enough time reporting on Long Island. I mean, if one is going to write a story about how this person's psyche develops in such a way as to allow him to commit this sort of crime, there are various ways one can go about it. The way that Joe went about it is he took Jeffrey's word entirely. He coaxed Jeffrey into doing these tapes for him, and as you see from reading the books, the tapes are a gigantic part of the book. I mean, they are a major, major part of the book. And so that's where Joe did a lot of his work on psychology of Jeffrey, simply by having these tapes transcribed and sticking them in there virtually verbatim as they were dictated by Jeffrey. My choice would have been, had I written the book, I would have spent a lot more time on Long Island because I was beginning to hear little bits and pieces of rumors about Jeffrey, about this time when he had a fight with some people, about how this may have happened or that may have happened. And to my way of thinking, a person does not suddenly turn like that and commit a crime of that level without having, real significant seeds in their childhood. And I don't think Joe spent enough time on the Long Island aspect of things. And I don't think I spent enough time on it either, because if I was going to write a book, I would have, what I was able to do in connection with that magazine piece I wrote gave me to believe that there was a lot more to be gotten if I was able to spend enough time on it, run down enough people, because it seemed like every place I would go, people knew Jeffrey or knew of Jeffrey or knew somebody who knew Jeffrey.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that increases by geometrical proportions. There was a lot of reporting to be done. I didn't have time to do it for a book. I had enough time to do what I needed for the magazine piece, but
Actually, that issue came up at the trial.
oh, really?
His friend, Dudley, somebody,
Yeah, I talked to Dudley.
they went back to Long Island together,
Uh-huh.
and McGinnis was supposed to do what you were talking about.
Right.
And Dudley testified that he didn't do anything. He just sort of stayed in his house, and Dudley thought that they were going to go around talking to people.
Uh-huh.
And McGinnis just never did that for whatever reason.
So, I mean, I don't understand what he did with those 4 years, to be honest about it. Analyze that book. Take a look at that book.
I have to tell you the truth. I have not really read that. I've looked in it, and I'm not.
You have to read the book.
I will read it.
You have to read the book.
But I think he made a mistake with that Colette stuff, or rather the voice of McDonald. I think that's very uninteresting. And I read some of the original transcripts when I was in California.
What, the grand jury transcripts?
No, the Jeffrey McDonald's original
Oh,
transcripts.
original transcripts of his tapes?
Yeah, he did transcribe it. It looked as if he did, but he didn't. He selected, and I think they were more interesting to read just as raw transcripts, if you can imagine.
Really?
I thought they were very flat in the book.
Okay. But anyway, I felt that I felt Joe was a little lazy in this book. I mean,
yeah,
I wasn't there watching him report every day, but to me, the evidence of the book said to me he was sort of lazy, because there's a very large chunk of that book that is nothing but grand jury transcript.
Yeah.
Nothing but grand jury transcript. Every once in a while there's a sentence or two where Joe says, and then they did this.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's grand jury transcript. This is not reporting. This is copying.
Yeah.
Okay? And a large portion of the book is taken up by the Jeffrey McDonald tapes. Again, this is not reporting. This is copying, choosing what you're going to. But he had somebody to transcribe those tapes for him. He didn't do that himself. So he had all of this stuff, and he had just. But given all the time he spent on this book, I say to myself, well, why the hell didn't he spend more time on Long Island? It seems to me that's the biggest missing chunk. I mean, he obviously had enough access to the prosecutors and to the Casabs and everybody else to get their view of the thing, but it seems to me he ought to have spent more time probing in this man's psyche. Instead, he comes out with this theory about esketrol, about this amphetamine that Jeffrey was taking for diet purposes. I mean, it sounds like sour grapes on my part to criticize his book. I'm just telling you what my reaction was to it as a journalist, and how I probably would have proceeded differently had I done the book myself. Okay, I think overall I liked the book. I mean, overall I didn't think it was a bad book. I enjoyed. I mean, I thought it was a good read and blah blah blah. But that would be my criticism.
Yeah.
All right, so I asked him to write the magazine piece. He said no, he didn't think it was a good idea, blah blah blah. And as I said, I started to send him information that I had left over from my reporting, stuff that I mentioned to him in the course of a conversation, and he found it surprising. I hadn't heard of it, so I said, "Oh, I'll send you." I don't remember what I sent him. Did I send him tapes, or did I send him? Maybe I sent him Xerox copies of these index cards on which I had put down some of the quotes or something. But I was trying to be helpful in some fashion because I wanted, now that I knew the book, I had the impression the book was not going to be a totally Jeffrey the Tortured Innocent book. I wanted to help out in whatever way I could so that I guess egotistically I'd have some sense of participation in the thing, even though I couldn't publish it myself.
Mm-hmm.
So, I began to do that. And then I decided to do a magazine piece at about the time of the book's publication. So I got on Joe's case, get me an early copy of the book. I'll read the book myself. Now I'll come and I'll interview you. My first idea was to just do a straight interview with Joe McGinnis off the book. It would be Keeler, McGinnis, straight interview, but my having read the book. But then I read the book and I said,
did then? Sent you an early copy?
Yeah, I have the early copy at home. And one of the first, it was a galley proof. I read it, devoured it actually real quick. Took a lot of notes on it and so on and so forth. Then I decided to do this interview. So I went up and I interviewed him. But then after I interviewed him, I decided, I decided somewhere along that, let me talk to Jeffrey too. And I thought I was going to run like interviews of the two of them in parallel. I said, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why not just do the story, report out the story, and write it as a story yourself? That's more satisfying.
Yeah.
So that's what I did. I went up, I spent a long time with Joe. I'll give you the transcript of the interview, with the exception that I mentioned earlier, that I can't find. And I spent a long time with Jeffrey. I got to see Jeffrey right after Mike Wallace had been there. And by this time, Jeffrey was beginning to sweat bullets. You knew that this was not going to be good for Jeffrey McDonald. And the stuff I told him was even more detailed than what Mike Wallace had told him. Mike didn't really, I don't think, let on as much what was in the book, but I would read verse and chapter to Jeffrey. This is what Joe says. This is what Joe says. And you can see him like really tightening up even as this is going on. He was not happy about this at all. And so I wrote the piece, and you have it. And sometime after the piece came out, I don't think Joe cared for the piece that much. I wrote in here about how the bestseller list was his monster. It's true. He was on the bestseller list as a kid, and he's been trying to get back there ever since, basically.
Yeah.
One of the things that Jeffrey said to me when I got there for that interview, and one of the questions I asked him, again, you'll see this in here, was, well, Jeffrey, how come you let Mike Wallace come here? Don't you know that Mike Wallace is going to ream you a new one? And by this time I said to him, well, how come you made this deal with Joe McGinnis? Didn't you realize what happened with Selling of the President in 1968? I mean, this was a book where Joe McGinnis was allowed to live with a group of people, be inside the operation, see how it ran on a day-to-day basis. Now he comes out of that, and he writes a book that makes these people bleed all over the sidewalk, okay? So I said to Jeffrey, did it not occur to you that this was an analogy for what might happen to you? And Jeffrey's answer was, basically, well, I needed the money, and he was a nice guy, and he came on like a nice guy, and blah blah blah. You'll read the long transcript, and some of it's in the magazine piece. And so basically, that's what happened. Greed and need for money overcame what should have been more caution. But by the time he spoke to me, is this thing still ticking away? I guess it is. By the time he spoke to me, Jeffrey had begun to do more research into Joe McGinnis, you see, and he had read of his other books, and he had come to the conclusion that Going to Extremes, the Alaska book, was very much like this. Okay, and his book Heroes, which is about various people that Joe has met in his life and about Joe's life, it's a very autobiographical book.
Yeah, sorry.
Is also a book that talks a lot about Joe and sort of is a situation also where Joe worms his way into the friendship of people and then sort of turns on them afterwards and writes pieces that really zap it to them. I'm not saying this was my conclusion. This was the conclusion Jeffrey had reached now after having read these other works of Joe McGinnis. Now it's too late, He reads these other works of Joe McGinnis and comes to the conclusion, hey, what have I done to myself here? Maybe this guy, maybe there was ample precedent for him turning on me. Maybe if I had studied his work prior to this, I would have known that the man that's the way he operates. That's what Jeffrey was saying to me, and I'll show it to you where he says that, and you can take it if you want. So that, so now you have these two guys at each other's throats, and Jeffrey's saying, "I hope the book burns." You know, it's kind of a strange situation because if the book doesn't sell, Jeffrey doesn't get any further proceeds, but he might not get any further proceeds anyway because there's all kinds of legal proceedings going on between McGinnis and McDonald, which I didn't totally understand, even prior to this suit taking place over the business of McGinnis's advances. Now you have to do some reporting with McGinnis about the status of his finances. Okay, McGinnis came into this book having written a number of books that were ostensibly fairly successful. But I take it that McGinnis is not very good at marshaling his resources, shall we say. That money tends to slip through his fingers. I don't know whether it's that he likes to travel, that he likes to go to the track. I think he does like to go to the track. I think he puts that in his book Heroes. But he has this lovely, lovely house in Williamstown. I don't know. Did you talk to him up there?
Yeah, I
It's a
thought.
nice.
I thought he was just selling it and
Was he selling it?
moved it somewhere else.
Really? Well, I wouldn't doubt it because it probably cost them pretty good money. It's right on the main street, right down from the Clark Institute, you know. And I know you're a Manhattan Centrite, so you don't you consider the existence of any place outside of downtown Manhattan. But I think it's a nice town.
Oh, Williamstown is lovely.
Yeah.
I
You didn't like the house.
I wasn't that crazy about the house, but no, I like Williamstown, and I have a summer place a little south of there, so I saw him at the end of the summer.
Whereabouts?
There. Near Great Barrington.
Uh-huh.
You know around there?
Uh-huh. When we were in Albany, we used to travel out to Berkshires a lot. It was an hour's drive away from Albany, so there's no problem to get there.
No, I was very struck in those letters that I read.
Hang on for a second, John. This is my colleague, Kathy Geiger.
Oh,
This is Janet Malcolm from the New Yorker.
nice to meet you.
This is our new bookshelf. Came in a while ago. When you get a chance, we can get. It's not short. It just needs the legs. That's all. So maintenance can come and deliver the legs. Are you splitting in a bit or what? What's that? What is it? Oh, this is the National Desk stuff. Okay, why don't you go through it first and see what may be in there?
I started going through it.
Yeah.
I unfortunately should have done just I actually think done the done. I took actual file and painted it for as well as taking it to him.
Yeah.
Oh, it's fun.
It's supposed to be a 45-minute tape. Oh, not percent. Guinness is finances, yeah.
I was about to observe that that's the kind of light motif in those letters about how strapped he is.
Yeah.
And how every penny coming in.
And yet he got a $280,000 advance for his book.
Yeah.
That's not a small advance. Now he gave $70,000 to Jeffrey,
Yeah.
but I think he had a lot of bills from previous books and stuff. I don't think he.
Also, he probably had alimony in the first
Oh yeah,
having those kids.
I'm sure he did.
College expenses and. Well, it's probably.
I think Joe came into this book needing a biggie. You know, in terms of his own personal life, he needed a big book, not only for his ego, but for his to buy him beer and pretzels. You know.
Yeah.
So he needed that book, and Jeffrey needed the money too. They needed each other in a very big way. There was a strong symbiosis going on there between Jeffrey and Joe, and so that explains why nobody else would have had a shot, because maybe somebody like Womble, who was also approached at some point. You might want to talk to Womble briefly.
Yeah.
And it would have to be somebody of that caliber, somebody whose name alone would command a gigantic advance.
Yeah.
Okay, and Joe's did.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not sure what'll happen in future, but that was certainly why they got together, because Jeffrey needed money, Joe needed money, and together they could get it. Maybe separate. Maybe Joe couldn't have sold this book as a balanced journalistic book. Maybe it would not have commanded nearly as big an advance if he were offering this book as a book that was going to look at it from all sides, but not have a specific deal with anybody. I don't know.
Mm.
But it's a question worth asking, certainly. Anyway, so at some point during all this, we talked about. Oh, you should talk. By the way, if you want to talk to other people about Joe during the trial, I would recommend that you try to speak to Ginny Carroll, Virginia Carroll, Carroll. She was the state editor at the Raleigh News Observer. I don't know where she's gone now, but you could probably find out from the Raleigh News Observer where she could be found. She was the local reporter there who, probably kept tabs of this better than most of the others.
Mm-hmm.
And for a while, she actually was a stringer for Newsday when I couldn't be there. I went down and covered the
Carroll.
Carroll.
Jean. No?
Virginia.
Oh, Virginia.
Ginny, she went by.
Carol, and that's the name of the paper, the Raleigh.
News and Observer.
Mhm. And why is she a wife?
Well, I would say that if you wanted to talk, if you wanted to get a sense from other people who were at the trial about the relationship of Jeffrey and Joe during the trial and their perception of it, she might be somebody to talk to. Okay.
Yeah.
Another person you might want to talk to is Naomi Kaufman, Kaufman. She was a reporter for the AP there at the time. She got pissed on a little bit by Jeffrey McDonald. Something she wrote or something she said sort of pissed her off. So she was also a fairly good observer of the Joe and Jeffrey relationship. If you want to do that, those are,
She was mad at McGinnis, not McDonald.
no, I think it was McDonald who pissed on her.
McDonald.
But I'm not sure whether I can't remember whether McGinnis sort of joined in the deal or whether how his relationship was to her. But both of those people were pretty good reporters, and they both were there observing the McGinnis McDonald relationship. So if you want to talk to other people, you might want to chat with them.
And I could get her number from AP.
You probably could go call the AP personnel office. She's no longer in Raleigh. She's someplace else on the West Coast. You probably have to talk to her by phone. But anyway, she's a person you might want to speak to if you want to go into that level of detail about that stage of things.
Okay.
All right. So anyway, we talked about all that stuff here. Blah blah blah. I talked about the Kassabs. Oh, at one point, Joe said to me, he said, if the circumstances were reversed, I don't think I would have been as nice to you as you've been to me. McGinnis says to me. And I said to myself, Schmuck, he's right. It's true. I mean, once it was clear to me that I wasn't going to get this book, my instinct is basically to give out information rather than to hold it in. And I was trying to be, I'm not saying I gave him any big deal information. I tried to help him in whatever little ways I could. But he did say that to me one time. And so it was a fairly good relationship. We were working.
Well, I was shocked as you were talking about how generous she was to her.
Well, I mean, I didn't have anything to lose by it anymore. I had all this information I had gathered for a purpose that no longer existed. So what am I going to do? Let it die someplace in a drawer? Why not just try to help the guy out? If he's writing a book that's really going to be a fairly truthful book, if you can help him in some small way, no big deal, is the way I looked at it. And he was a nice guy. And he would help me in little ways, too. He called me once or twice when some development in the case had happened. Usually I knew about it in advance. I mean, throughout this case, I mean, I was on the phone with Jeffrey McDonald. I was sitting in the Justice Department, okay? I knew that he had been indicted or was about to be indicted and was about to be arrested. But I wanted to talk to him one more time before they had him in the slammer. So I called him at his home. I was in the phone booth in the Justice Department, I remember. And I called him at his home in Huntington Beach, and he was on the phone with me, and I got a couple of quotes from him and blah, blah, blah. And then there was a knock on the door at his end of the phone. And he said, hang on for a second, Bob, I don't know who that is. And then he goes to the door. He comes back and says, I don't know what this is all about. This is the FBI. So, I mean, I was always like the bearer of bad tidings to these people. I would always find out that the decision had been rendered and it was, bad news for Jeffrey. And I would always be like the first person to call them. And so they almost became fearful of hearing from me, I guess, because I became obsessed with this case. So people would tell me about this, Anyway, so I had all this information. I didn't figure any percentage in holding it back from the guy. So I figured, I'll let him have some of it. Then there came a time, somewhere after I wrote this 1983 magazine piece about the book, when Jeffrey or one of Jeffrey's various henchpersons sent me a bunch of letters in the mail. You've read the letters, okay? And that's when I began to get a little ticked at Joe McGinnis, because you saw what he said in the letters. Don't talk to Keeler, This was happening, meanwhile, all back further in time. And I thought that was excessive. First of all, this is like the football giants beating up on a peewee football team. There was no chance I was going to get this book anyway. I was working hard on this, and I was trying to write a book, and I was writing a magazine piece, but realistically, there was zero chance I was going to get a book contract. And to me, looking at it in hindsight, I thought it was excessive on Joe's part to have, insisted to Jeffrey that he not talk to me and all this kind of good stuff, So I sort of became kind of ticked off at him. I mean, not to the extent where I'd punch him out or anything like that, but I thought that was kind of a bush league way to operate.
Yeah.
And, the other thing was I looked at the tapes, and knowing what I knew from having interviewed McGinnis, he told me he was convinced that Jeffrey did this thing before the jury came in. Then he told me a scene he had with Jeffrey at Butner, which was this federal prison down there. Is this thing still running? Or I guess it still is, the longest tape in the history of the world. Oh, it's a 90-minute. Okay. And he told me the scene at Butner where he went to see Jeffrey, and he was convinced by then that Jeffrey did it, and but he talks about the back and forth that went on in his head. I'll point that out to you in my transcript here. So it was clear to me that even though Joe may have started out believing that Jeffrey was probably innocent, certainly by the time the jury came back, Joe was of the belief that Jeffrey done this thing. Okay. And then the next thing you know, you look, and I remembered back in his book, I mean, right after Jeffrey was in prison, here's Joe living in his apartment, rifling through his stuff with Jeffrey's permission. And then he's writing him all these letters saying, keep those tapes coming, Jeffrey, even the hard parts, talk about, your sex life and everything else. And he's writing him all these really maudlin sentiments about, oh, how terrible it is that you're away, and oh God, it's what an injustice, and so on and so forth. I think he went beyond what most journalists would do in that circumstance in terms of not telling Jeffrey the truth about his feelings. And there's a whole philosophical discussion there. One could say, well, Keeler, you never told Jeffrey the truth about your feelings either. That's true, I never did. But on the other hand, Jeffrey never asked. Nor did I ever say to Jeffrey, Jeffrey, you're as innocent as the driven snow, and I just know it. I certainly never said that. I think that a daily journalist, somebody who's working on stories for a daily paper, is supposed to, you can't be objective completely because everybody's going to have biases. Everybody's going to have opinions on things. Nobody is an automaton. So I came to an early opinion that Jeffrey did this thing. But I think the proof that I treated him fairly and acted fairly as a journalist is that Jeffrey in all that decade did not complain about my stories.
Yeah.
Okay? So I never told him what I felt because I think that's the way a journalist should behave for the most part. You ought not to go around volunteering to people your feelings about the case.
Yeah.
All right? So if Joe had but that's a daily journalist, and there's a whole other question. Now Joe is in a different situation altogether from daily newspaper journalist. He's in a situation where he's got this deal with Jeffrey. They are essentially business partners in addition to source and reporter. So that really complicates matters.
All right. Well,
I mean, one could ask philosophically, does that change Joe's obligation to Jeffrey in terms of the truth? Obviously, Joe would argue not, that this
he
contract.
just want to have it both ways.
Yeah.
Right? He just wanted to be sort of this, I'm the journalist, I'm entitled to speak in my own counsel, or doing whatever is necessary to get the story. And then he also is, as you very acted into it, his business partner.
Yeah.
And the two, in a way, don't go together. You shouldn't get into deals like that. And
Well, it makes it very hard. Makes it very hard. So that's a complicating factor. But I'm trying to analyze it. What should Joe have done? What could Joe have done once he came to that conclusion?
Yeah.
Maybe in all good faith, he started out this book thinking, hey, I'm going to write this book about this poor guy who was a real brilliant guy who was railroaded by the government. And, the government certainly made a lot of mistakes in prosecuting this case. So it was not what you call your textbook example of prosecution. So there was ample reason for people to gripe about the conduct of the case. My conclusion, and obviously the conclusion of a jury of Jeffrey's peers, although Jeffrey does not consider that he has a peer on this planet, was that Jeffrey did this thing, that the evidence, although it was tainted by the investigation, was not tainted enough to make it not valid for conviction.
When you came to feel that G had done it, did you start feeling differently about him?
I had never met him at that point. I came to feel Jeffrey had done this before I ever met him, based on the evidence that I was seeing, that the Kassabs were telling me, my own examination of the trial.
You started out with talking to the Kassabs.
Right. I started out at the very beginning, as I said, talking to the Kassabs to write this story about how they had changed their mind. And in the course of that, I spent a lot of time going through the clips, looking at the evidence, reading everything that there was.
Mm-hmm.
And then I had a strong feeling that Jeffrey had done this from the beginning. And the more I got into the case, the more I read the evidence, the more I studied it, the clearer it became to me that,
So you never had the problem of having a sort of a relationship with him when you thought he was innocent, or he might have been innocent.
No. I don't think I met Jeffrey. And I spoke to him on the phone, but I don't think I actually physically met Jeffrey. I may be wrong on this, but my impression is I don't think I physically met him until he got off the plane from California, coming to Raleigh in 1974 to face the grand jury. Now, this is a year after I first started writing about the case. Meanwhile, I've been writing all of these stories about the Kassabs' efforts to get the grand jury set up and blah, 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 like that. Was it 74? I think it was either 74. Oh, I know it was. It was 74 because my daughter had just been born, and we packed ourselves in the car and drove to Raleigh, North Carolina. And I covered the opening of the grand jury, which was Jeffrey's testimony and so on. So that was the first time I met Jeffrey. By that time, I had seen enough looked at some of the Article 32 transcripts, which is the original military proceeding. Freddie had let me look at those, and I had read them myself, and I had drawn some of the same conclusions he had drawn. That Jeffrey's story to the grand jury and to the investigators just did not square with reality whatsoever. So I had come to that conclusion before I even saw Jeffrey walk off the plane.
So your problem, if you had a moral problem here, really would have been if it turned out that he was innocent, or he was not convicted, or you changed your mind, and then you would have had some kind of thing with the Kassabs, right? What would you have told them?
Well, I don't know.
Is that accurate, David?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure I had a problem because I wasn't trying to write anything that was going to prove anything. I was writing a journalistic account of what was happening
But
in
they
the
would have
case.
been disappointed if you had sort of gone over to Jeffrey's side, no? Because wouldn't they have sort of thought?
Oh yeah, I'm sure they would have felt betrayed if they thought that I had become a. In fact, many times during the course of this, I think that they felt I was swayed by Jeffrey and I was being very pro Jeffrey.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is, I mean, I never believed any less firmly than they did that Jeffrey did this thing.
Yeah.
But I didn't have any relationship with the Kassabs in terms of, in terms of monetary relationship.
What about friendship? Did you get friendship?
I would say friends. I mean, they did some things along the way that sort of pissed me off. I mean, ultimately they decided to go with Joe, and tell their side of the story to Joe as well. And I don't know. I would say friends. I think that I probably had more to do with them than I had to do with most news sources. They would call me like all the time, all hours of day and night, and I mean, they're a lot older than I am for one thing. They're 20 years and change older than I am. They're not people that I would consider friends necessarily. I think after a while we began to exchange Christmas cards, but that was about the extent of it.
Mm-hmm.
And as you see from that 1980, if you look at the 1980 piece, they didn't like it too much because it points out that Freddie and Mildred had been snobs. When Colette was a child, she went out with this guy Dean Chamberlain who had dirty fingernails, and they said to her, "If you marry Dean Chamberlain, Colette, you'll be pushing a baby carriage and going to the firemen's events." And instead, they pushed her back into the arms of Jeffrey. Was waiting. Because he was going to be a doctor, and he was smart, and he was, the top of the class, and all. So it was sort of a snobby kind of a thing that they had. And I don't think they liked my portraying that, but I was trying to tell the truth, Part of the problem with being a daily newspaper reporter is that you have to write stories all along. People, I do it in politics all the time. I write stories that beat people over the head, and I have to be able to talk to them the next day, If there's anything with the Kassabs, I wrote stories that they weren't too happy about. They didn't like that magazine piece about on the 10th anniversary because they felt it showed Mildred. Writing stories that people don't like, the way you get away with it is trying to write, for the most part, be fair.
Yeah.
And I was able to have both sides still talk to me after a decade of writing a story, okay?
Right.
I think that in my own head, I figured that magazine piece in '83 where I learned about Joe's relationship with Jeffrey was basically going to be my last piece on this.
Yeah.
I may have written one more news piece, but I decided that was essentially going to be my last piece. But getting back to Joe, what should Joe have done?
That's the question. I would love to hear this.
I was thinking about that. It's a difficult problem. All right, here's a guy who struck this deal with Jeffrey. He thought he was innocent. Okay, we'll give Joe that. Now all of a sudden, the trial comes and says, "Geez, this guy did this thing." And now he's rooting around in Jeffrey's apartment, living there, rooting around in Jeffrey's file, and finds more evidence that, to his mind, shows that Jeffrey did this thing. The business about the drugs, the business about the tooth test, the polygraph, all that stuff. So now what do you do? All of a sudden, you got something that's 180 degrees out from what you thought in the first place. You throw up your hands. Obviously, you couldn't do that. I think that a more honest course would have been for him at least not to actively say to Jeffrey how terribly distressed he was and how this, to hint that this was a terribly unjust turn of events and everything else. What Joe says, I'll give you a piece that appeared in the Philadelphia Inquirer. What Joe says is that, yes, he had come to the conclusion that Jeffrey was guilty, but he was really torn. He wanted to believe that he wasn't because he had come to like the guy and so on and so forth. That's how Joe defends the way in which he wrote these letters to Jeffrey. Maybe so. I don't know. I still feel myself that he went a little too far. That he, instead of just clamming up and gulping real hard and not saying to Jeffrey anything much about what he felt about the trial, just proceeding and writing it, which would have been a troublesome thing to live with anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But I think far better to do it that way than to do what he ultimately did do, which was to deceive Jeffrey. So instead of just not saying anything, he actively went out of his way, I think, to get Jeffrey's continued cooperation. And in doing that, I think he just deceived him in a way.
It seemed fortuitous to me. I mean, chances are McDonald would have cooperated anyway because she wanted this book to come into existence and we could get the money from it.
I think that's probably true. Jeffrey never asked me, and I think Joe once told me, or Joe maybe written in the book or someplace, that I don't think Jeffrey even asked him.
Yeah.
No, Jeffrey is such a strange personality that it probably wouldn't occur to him that somebody wouldn't believe him,
Yeah. Yeah.
And see, Jeffrey McDonald has never met a human being in his life that he considers smarter than him, as far as I could tell. So he would not, he wouldn't assume that somebody would disbelieve him. There's so many adoring groupies following him around, believing him no matter what. And why would he believe that Joe McGinnis would disbelieve him? So he probably would not have ever asked Joe point blank, hey, and their contract basically gave Joe a lot of freedom. Joe could write whatever he wanted. And Jeffrey was not going to be able to sue him for libel and was not going to have advance rights to look at the text or anything else. So Joe had total freedom under the terms of that contract. He didn't have to do what he did. I think you're right. I think it was sort of gratuitous. He could probably have still accomplished his mission, written his book without saying in these letters the kinds of things that he said.
Also, he could have maybe said some things on the phone but not put it in writing. I mean, there's something I wonder about why he wanted to get that all in writing.
I don't know.
He said practically that because he was in prison, he had to correspond with it.
Well, there is truth to that. I mean, it's very difficult to talk to a guy in prison on the phone. And he wanted Jeffrey to keep giving him these tapes or so on.
But to me, that kind of a record perception.
Well, then the other question that arises out of all this is the question of how significant is this really in the grand scope of journalism? This doesn't help your story any, but I have come to the conclusion that maybe it's not all that significant because there are not that many cases where you have this sort of exclusive arrangement. Well, unless you consider ghost-written books about a celebrity or something. But most of those are just slavish and obsequious anyway. There's not much likelihood that any of those books is going to be.
But where I feel it has something to do with all journalists is just in that relationship of the subject and the author.
Yeah.
Just apart from any deals, I mean, most of us don't have any kind of financial arrangement and we don't even work with releases. I've never worked with a release. But I've worked with people who haven't liked what I've written. I mean, I've had interviews. I mean, after what I write comes out, you may not like what all that. And I think this whole question of how far one can go in making a subject comfortable and presenting yourself as a sympathetic person, and how much you owe your subject some kind of a indication of what you think, what you feel, how much privacy you're entitled to as a journalist. These are interesting issues.
Well, as a daily newspaper journalist, I would say that you don't have to tell anybody what you think about anything.
Yeah.
In fact, you ought not to, for the most part. If you feel comfortable with it, I suppose it doesn't hurt. And if you really honestly do side with somebody or something, I suppose it doesn't hurt to give signals of that in some fashion. But I don't think but really, it's probably a better idea just to try and be as standoffish from the situation as you can. Be there, observe it as best you can. Again, no journalist comes without biases or opinions. Everybody forms opinions about everything. Best you can do is to try and keep them in the background, keep them in your head until such time as whatever. But while you're covering a case or while you're covering a story, you just try and be as fair as you can, as accurate and as fair as you can, so that neither side can gripe that you didn't give them a fair chance.
But even if a lot of people one talks to aren't on one side or another, they're kind of people you're talking to, and then they read what you've written, and it's like seeing a photograph of yourself that you don't like, right? And people tend to be a little naive about what it needs to be written about.
Yeah. Well, I understand that. All I ever ask is that when I say something, that what appears in quotes with my name is what I say. That's all I ever ask. I'm very careful about that. I used to cover a guy in town government who was extremely inarticulate. I used to call him a talking horse. And it was very difficult to quote him on more than a couple of words at a time because he back and fill and march into these grammatical impasses. You know, you'd end up with a 2-word quote and everything else was paraphrased on either side of it. But I was always very careful not to attribute within those quotation marks, whatever goes in those quotation marks, my way of thinking as a journalist, that person said that in exactly those words. Okay? I don't even change punctuation if I can possibly help it. And I think it's wrong to do that.
Well, I think you should do that in daily journalism. And the kind of thing I write, which are long pieces, where I might interview somebody for, over a period of months and keep covering the same subject over and over again. And then I feel make a synthesis of, somebody telling, I was born here
Right.
and I went to school there and I got now giving up a life story. And I might have learned that over a period of 6 months. Um, I feel that this is legitimate
Well,
to put
we
that in a
probably,
monologue form. Now, I know this could be controversial.
well, I'd probably differ on that with you. I mean, most times you can find the quotes that you need. Most times you talk to somebody long enough, you can find the quotes you need and just put ellipses in or.
Yeah, but
So,
to feel you're saying full of ellipses, if it's
yeah.
something done over 50 interviews and all you're using are 5 facts, it begins to look like Tom Wolfe if you sort of
I suppose.
that's it.
I suppose.
So I think probably you would end up if you were doing this kind of thing agreeing, and yet to the naive public and or not even so naive, as people who hear that somebody has misquoted somebody, it sounds very serious. I mean, this came up at Dennis's trial now, that the lawyer was accusing him of this kind of cheating because he didn't indicate when he was doing that voice of Jeffrey McDonald where there were ellipses. And I thought that was not. I didn't think McDonald did anything wrong. I thought he made artistic mistakes. I mean, I might have done it differently, but I don't see how it should be immoral.
Yeah.
With hundreds of hours of stuff.
Just my view is I like to, when when I write a piece and something, it says so-and-so said so-and-so, you can bet your ass if they said it. Okay?
That's certainly for daily journalism. I think that's very important.
You can bet your ass. And I've been in this game for 20 years and nobody has ever come back to me and said I misquoted it. Let them try. Because I'm very, very careful about it.
Do you tape or do you take notes?
Oh, it depends on the story. If it's a brief breaking daily story, I just basically take extensive notes.
Yeah.
And, I write them in longhand. And I live by the old journalist method of half brain, half of your brain is writing down the part that stands out in neon that they just said that's interesting. And I'm writing it down verbatim. So I get very nervous when people interview me and they write down 3 or 4 words and they think they're so smart that later on they can come back and piece them all together again and get them exactly as I said them. Because nobody's that smart.
Yeah.
I taught journalism at Columbia and one of my students suggested to me, that one of the textbooks they had said that most reporters really don't need to take notes. They can just sort of put it together afterwards. I said, the fuck they can. I said, who's that jerk who's telling you that? So I jumped up and down on the table. I think I made my point. I told him about the Jimmy Stewart. I don't know if you ever saw this movie called Dial Northside 777, Jimmy Stewart. And it's about this reporter in Chicago who's given a classified ad by his managing editor or city editor. Hang on a second. Here's Bob Keeler. And the city editor gives him this classified ad, and what it is an old woman who's working scrubbing floors. Turns out to be an old woman working scrubbing floors in a municipal building to raise money to get any kind of information that would clear her son, who was wrongfully convicted of a murder. So now Jimmy Stewart goes to the municipal building in the dead of night. It's a really interesting scene. She's the only one there. She's on her hands and knees scrubbing floors. And he's standing there with his hands in his pockets, talking to her, and she's giving him one good quote after another. And he asks her, well, what happens if she doesn't get any information with this $5,000? She says, I work till I get $10,000. I do anything it takes to get my son free. She's spouting great quote after great quote. And Jimmy Stewart is standing there with his fingers in his hands in his pockets. And every time I see that movie, I have the same reaction. Take notes, asshole! Because I'm not a dummy, and I don't believe anybody's smart enough to take down fragmentary quotes and pieces of what somebody says, and then go back, at their leisure after a glass of wine and some cheese, write down exactly how it came out. It don't happen. Not in this world, not in any world that I know of. So I get a little touchy about that. Why I'm happy that you're taking tapes.
But would you think it was incorrect of me if when I quoted you, I took various things you said, I didn't, it wasn't exactly that happened now. You know?
I have to see how it comes out.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obviously we've had an hour and a half conversation. I trusted you enough not to tape it myself as a backstop, but still seeing the transcripts I gave you, I took exact transcripts of what they said.
Mm-hmm.
I found the part that I needed. I put it between quotes.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it's about art. I consider myself a craftsman in this game. I practice a craft. The craft is to make the thing as smooth as possible so people can read it. I think we're both after the same thing.
Yeah.
There are ways of doing that without, if you struggle enough over the structure of sentences and paragraphs and stuff like that. We're both in the paragraph manufacture game. There are ways of doing that without doing violence to somebody's words. Making sure that whatever you put between quotes, that person said.
Yeah, but sometimes if you really could literally what somebody said.
Mm-hmm. They sound like schmucks?
Not just like schmucks, they don't really, but many people, I'd say most people, some people talk in sentences and are very articulate. Most of us.
I consider myself in that category.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then I'll probably take you verbatim, but there are other people who do need editing. Otherwise, you're doing them a terrific disservice by putting in all the, like.
Oh, no, I don't recommend that you put in or. No, I'll do that. That's the most I'll do. I'll take out the uhs and the ums, and I'll find I'll find a sentence that is a point I want to make in the story, or I want to attribute to them. I'll find a place where they said that fairly cleanly. If they didn't say it cleanly, I'll paraphrase what they said.
Yeah.
I'll report what they said as a paraphrase. But what I'm saying is that what people believe when they see something between quotation marks is that that's exactly what the person said. That's what people believe, whether we like it or not. That's what the people out there in the streets believe. So since I'm selling this product, I feel like I have the obligation to deliver to them what they think they're getting. Now, until I can change their perception of what they think they're getting, I have to deliver to them what they think they're getting now. And that is whatever's in direct quotes is what this person said. And if I can't find a place where this person said that with sufficient articulateness or whatever, then I'll put it in paraphrase. I'll say it in my words, and I will say to them, look, I am now describing to you what this person said. Take my word for it. That's what they said.
Yeah.
But that's not the same level as saying this is exactly what they said, and here it is. But anyway, that's not the issue in this book.
That's right. This we could argue at a journalist panel.
No, this is just sort of my way of warning you. I'll come back and I'll beat you up if you miss me up. I'm from Brooklyn. I'm fairly honest about these things. But anyway, so what should Joe have done? I think Joe should have not deceived Jeffrey. She had to go along for a while, gulping real hard, just not telling Jeffrey what it was that he really felt. I think he probably still would have gotten the book accomplished.
Yeah.
I think Jeffrey probably would not have asked him point blank, what do you think about this? I think ultimately Jeffrey would have had the same reaction to the book anyway. He would have been angry. But I don't think he would have had any grounds for a lawsuit.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. See, Joe McGinnis went into this trial with far more protection than the average journalist has. I mean, first, the average journalist, if he's writing about Jeffrey McGinnis, is really heavily protected because Jeffrey really is a public figure within the meaning of the Sullivan case. So it would be really hard to libel Jeffrey without showing some incredible malice. But so any journalist going into writing about Jeffrey would have that protection. But Joe had the additional protection of a contract legally signed and binding saying they couldn't sue him for libel.
Yeah, but there was a problem with that. This, in a way, he would have been better off if he had that. Because there was that unfortunate phrase put in there. This sort of, I will not sue you as long as you maintain the essential integrity of my life. That ridiculous.
I'm surprised.
Ridiculous phrase. However,
why did Joe's lawyers allow that to happen?
That I would like to find out. But
I mean, that's a gigantic loophole through which you can drive a very large truck.
It's not only a loophole, but what had happened is it's so paradoxical. Is if this gave the other side the opportunity to argue that Joe has some kind of an obligation. He not only wasn't protected, but he had contracted to do something for McDonald that he now hadn't done. So he came out because of that release
Mm-hmm.
in much worse shape than you and I would have come out if we just talked him into no deal.
What did you find out about who's paying the 325? Is Joe, or is it insurance company,
They're
or
being very coy about it. They won't say, but it must be the insurance company because if you remember, he sued the
Yeah.
insurance company to protect it, to cover him.
yeah,
So much. I think they just insurance companies don't like to advertise it when they were famous
yeah.
to extract other suits.
Well, I don't know. So I guess Joe is going to continue now. Can they countersue Joe?
No, they don't want to. Everybody's glad it's over.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just let it go.
sure. McDonald's happy. He's got the money.
Yeah, he's got 325. But I'm not using to find out how much of that gets dispersed to Bernie Siegel and Brian O'Neill and all these various acolytes who've been working for him for so long, for so little.
Well, Siegel hasn't been working for him anymore.
No, Siegel has been working for him for a while, but I gotta believe Jeffrey still owes him some money
I see. Yeah.
from the trial. You know, that was a 7-week trial.
Yeah.
And Bernie blew it in the end. You know, at the end of the trial, he screwed up, gave a terrible closing argument, just blew it, and let his emotions run away with him. Joe talks about this in the book. I thought did a fairly decent job of describing that. And but for all that time, Siegel defended Jeffrey, was, you know, like a lion in his corner. You know, it'll be interesting to know how much money Jeffrey has raised over the time since he's been away, because these people, there are so many people who are loyal to him. It's really incredible.
Some of those jewelers have now become basically involved.
I don't know about that. I talked to a couple of jurors when I wrote a piece a while ago about the jury. I talked to a couple. There was one lady who.
Talking about this trial, not.
Oh, the trial. Okay, I thought you meant the murder trial.
No.
Oh.
The civil trial.
Oh yeah. I tell you, the guy cuts a great impression. I wish I had. I don't know what it is that he has, but I'd like to borrow it for a week just to see what happens. You know, women like throw themselves on the ground in front of this man. You know, and
he's very confident. I was.
Oh, he's a bright man. He's a very smart man.
How, you know, maybe he's living in solitary confinement on Terminal Island, which can't be much fun.
He's in solitary now?
He's been in solitary all throughout this trial.
Where's Jay? Is Jay in Terminal Island too?
His brother?
His brother, yeah.
Did you know?
Yeah, Jay threatened to I believe it was chop up the attorney general and into so many pieces that there wouldn't be enough for the pigs to eat, or something along those lines. So the government decided this was not an appropriate thing for them to do, so he put him away.
We wonder about that family, though, with these two boys. And
well, the thing that Joe never discovered, and I didn't discover either because I didn't have a chance to work on it enough, but one of the things hinted at in the book is that Jeffrey had to leave town. You know, there was a time when he spent a whole year or so down in this little town in Texas.
Yeah.
Right at the height of the baseball season and everything else. That is really a zoo. So the question arises, what happened to make him flee the jurisdiction? And what some people felt was that there had been some kind of really bad fight with his brother where he beat the living bejabbers out of his brother. And Joe was never able to find out anything about that. Again, I feel like Joe probably didn't do enough real solid reporting on Long Island. Again, I didn't either because I wasn't working on a book, but he had 4 years to do this goddamn thing.
I would think that knowing as much as possible about the mother would have been very telling. Did we go into that in the book?
He talks about Perry some. I don't know how much time he spent with her. And he spent time with her at the trial and everything else. I don't know how much time he spent with relatives or back here on Long Island or with Perry after the fact.
What that childhood had been like with the mother.
Well, he does a lot of sort of two-bit psychology in this book, sort of speculating about this and that, the other thing. To my way of thinking, there's too much of that and not enough of reporting.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean?
No,
I tend to be a nuts and bolts reporter. I go, you talk to people, you find out things. You don't sit there and suck on your thumb.
Let the stuff tell its story rather than calling somebody names.
Yeah, you don't sit there and suck on your thumb and just sort of cogitate about what might have happened.
Yeah.
You go out and you do it, you know. But anyway, I don't.
Now, one.
I feel funny even talking about this in a sense because it comes to look like it's only totally sour grapes. I guess.
You don't sound that way to me.
Well, I don't know. I was angry at Joe when those letters came to me. I wasn't angry enough at him even to write him a letter and say, Joe, I'm angry at you. I think this was a dirty thing you did to me. I never did. I mean, I wasn't that angry.
But
I don't get that.
It was just sort of completely just coming in from the outside looking at. I felt that those comments about doing things to prevent other people's books.
Yeah.
That's very shabby to me because sort of, you know, sending letters from lawyers that they might sue,
Maybe that's the way they do things in publishing. I don't
I
know.
never heard of anybody doing anything.
I don't know. But I was pissed. I was
That
pissed.
didn't seem nice. That seemed really lousy, and I felt sorry for him that it's being revealed.
Yeah. Well, I was upset enough about it to not particularly want to seek out Joe McGinnis's company anymore.
Yeah.
That's the extent of it. I wasn't angry enough about it to write him a nasty letter, to even call him and talk and chew him out. I just, okay, this is not somebody I feel comfortable with anymore because I now know something about him that I didn't know before that makes me feel uncomfortable being his pal. So that's the extent of it.
Yeah.
And long before that had happened, I had given up on the idea of my ever publishing a book. It wasn't going to happen. So
Is it possible that anything we did prevented you from being published?
I rather doubt it.
You don't think so?
That's why I was so angry because I don't think it was necessary.
Mm-hmm.
It was gratuitous.
Yeah.
I don't think I would have gotten the book published under any circumstances once he had that contact because he's Joe McGinnis and I'm somebody who's never been published before. It's as simple as that. He's got a name that sells books. I got a name that helps people to sleep at night if they see it on a book cover because they've never seen it before. Okay, so he didn't have to come out and hit me over the head like that with Jeffrey. I wouldn't have gotten the book out of the deal anyway. I was trying.
Yeah.
It turns out I was trying based on an erroneous assumption. I was trying as hard as I did because I thought that Joe was going to write this Jeffrey the Tortured Innocent book. Obviously, that's not what he was going to go to write. And as soon as I found that out, I said, there's no sense in me pursuing this any further because he's going to write a book that at least approximates the truth. So why pound my head against the floor and try and get a book published anyway? So I just gave up the ghost. And at that point, I just felt, okay, Joe, I'll help you in whatever little way I can. It was just a couple of little pieces of information I exchanged with him, nothing of any real value to his book, to be honest about it. In fact, ultimately, I have to acknowledge candidly, I think I had a business arrangement with these guys too. I sold one photograph that I took at prison in Texas to the paperback company that published the paperback version of the book, and I got paid for it. One copy of the book. That was the extent of my remuneration. Oh no! Later on, I sold one of the photographs to TV Guide when they were doing a thing on the movie. I think they paid me. It might have been $100. I don't remember, but that was the extent of my remuneration for all of this. I got $100 from TV Guide for selling them a copy of this photograph. And I got one copy of the paperback book from the paperback book company for letting them use it in their book. And they screwed up the reproduction. It looked terrible. The original photograph, as you see on that cover, was a pretty good photograph. But I'm not sure it was that one or one of the ones inside. But they converted it from color to black and white and in the process muddied it all up. And it looks terrible. It looks like I was the worst photographer in the world. So if you look at the paperback version of this book today, you'll see my name, credit Bob Keeler, Newsday on the bottom. But I'm just not too happy about having it there because the reproduction is so bad. It looks like I'm the worst photographer who ever lived. I thought I did a pretty good job with the photograph.
I would think he would have liked this.
Well, Jeffrey?
Yeah.
I don't know. Probably he didn't see in it what I saw in it. By the way, the headline wasn't mine. One of my leaders. I didn't like the headline. I wanted to use something a little bit more. I wanted to use the two of them on the cover, the killer and the convict or something like that, as we did on the inside. The killer and the writer or whatever you want to call it.
He looks rather stern, yeah.
Yeah, he does. It looks sort of crazed. Are you going away now, Kate? Okay. Oh, this is from the National Desk stuff, the stuff you didn't let get away. Okay.
As it turned out, I got to that.
Oh, you did? Oh, good. Okay. All right, Kate. Thanks a lot. No, you won't see me tomorrow. I'll be in Westchester County tomorrow all day. See you Monday. Oh, you won't see me Monday either. I'm going out to Montauk on Monday. And if I can work it out, I'll probably go directly from Montauk to home and do some phone interviewing from home because I don't feel like schlepping all the way from Montauk back into here.
Yeah.
So I probably won't see you until Tuesday.
Okay, I'll have some chance to split.
Okay. Take care. I will.
Nice meeting you.
That's going to be cute.
Good luck on you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Probably be done sometime in the next 10 years. Going New Yorker time. When are you planning to have this finished?
I don't make plans like that.
You don't? But if they're paying you by the piece, don't you pretty much have to give them a piece before you get any money out of it?
Right.
Are you still, your husband is still providing you some income, is he?
That's what makes it.
That's what makes it possible. Okay.
Yeah.
Someday I would like to write for the New Yorker if I could afford it. But I could, it's one of those goofy things if you think about, but you couldn't, I have a family to do with all this kind of stuff. But anyway.
Is this the same picture?
No, I think
Huh.
it's slightly different photographs.
This one was a little softer and more wistful, isn't it? This was
I don't know. I think they're different photographs actually. They were taken at the same time. I took about 2 or 3 rolls there. As I said, the ants were biting me the entire time I was taking his photograph.
Now McGinnis looks younger here. When was it? 83.
83.
I'm sure.
I didn't take that photograph. My photographer took that photograph. Well, he has a big bald spot, as I do, or his is much bigger than mine. They were showing it on TV during one of these interviews, so you'll catch a glimpse of that.
How old are you, bro?
I'm 43.
That's your age, isn't it?
Joe's, I'm not sure. I forget.
Something like that, yeah. Do you know
I'll give you a
same age?
transcript. What else do I want to tell you today? Hold on. I covered all the stuff I wanted to cover. I'll give
Well,
you some stuff here.
You answered a lot. I do, so you answered a lot of the questions I was going to ask you.
Okay. I'm going to lend you this stuff so as to give you an incredible feeling of guilt so that when you write this down, you remember what I said about direct quotes. Okay? This is...
I will quote you accurately on quotes.
Good work. Good work. Remember, I'm from Brooklyn. I'll put this in a binder for you so it doesn't get
Went
lost.
to school there?
I went to Fordham.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't graduate from Fordham. I went to Fordham. I was honest about that. However, I had a 4.0 index while I was there. So
You had what?
a 4.0 index. I had straight A's while I was there, but I left and ran away to join the newspaper game. Herald Tribune. Put this all in here for you.
And did you then come here after the voted?
Well, what happened was I got a letter from the president with a subway token in it in 1965 from the president of the United States greeting. Bless you. So I was in the Army. And when I came back from the Army, the trip folded a few months after I got drafted.
Mm-hmm.
I was kidding around that it was cause and effect, but it wasn't. And so I didn't have the trip to look at as a job when I came back. So I went to work at the Waterbury Republican in Waterbury, Connecticut for a little while, covered civil rights. And then I went to work at Staten Island Advance for a couple of years. And then I went to work at Newsday in 71. And I started covering this case in 73. And after a while, it got to be a laugh. I mean, people would say, "Oh no, not another McDonald's story." I said, "Oh, this is the last one." No, really, this is it. This is positively the end. There won't be any need for any more stories after this, guaranteed. And they never believed me because it was never true. This is Heroes. You have that? All right, then I'll take this home with me. You have all the letters, or should I put this pile in here?
In chronological order there?
I don't know whether I have them in chronological order here or not.
You have all the letters, or just the ones that were in the complaint?
I have here whatever Jeffrey sent me. I'm willing to put them in the
It's like that would
folder.
be great to me to know what you have read in relation to what there is. So that would be great.
And also, I have my highlighting on here too.
Did Jeffrey highlight it for you?
No, those are my highlights.
Yeah.
I should make a copy for you of a couple of these other things. I mentioned the letter that I wrote to Joe where I was going to send him some information. I'll make a copy of that for you and I'll put it. Okay.
Well, the moral of those letters is don't write letters, right?
Moral of his letters is don't write. Well, I happen to believe in letters now that I'm a historian, and I'm writing about things happening 50 years ago.
But it makes you think, my God, what did I say 10 years ago that may end up in a court?
Yeah, I suppose.
I
tend to be
cringing for it. I read those.
Yeah, I know. Well, love letters could be bad, but I tend to be. All right, let me show you the problem here real quick. You'll see by these tabs that it's divided up. I did the transcript of each of them, and these are pretty exact transcripts, okay? And the tabs basically, the Joe background, it's all about Joe's background. I had the transcripts done in order of the interview, so it's fairly organized. This is the origins of the book. Unfortunately, it ain't there. That's what I lent to this guy, okay?
The origins of
how they got together, a lot of it is in the magazine piece, okay?
Yeah.
And then stuff about the trial is not there, okay? But all the rest of it is his reporting on the book, his writing, the aftermath of the book, blah, blah. Now, this is the Jeff stuff. This is about his life in prison. Mm-hmm. This is his version of the origins of the book. His feelings about Joe now, after the trial. And this is interviews with the Kassabs, okay? Interviews with other people. And these are my notes, plus the letters. So, however, even though I have lost the the stuff that had to do with, Joe's feelings, what I did was when I put together my list of questions for Jeffrey, I quoted exactly in my list of questions stuff that McGinnis said. Okay, now this is something you should focus on. Okay, this is what McGinnis said as he talked to Jeffrey at Putnam and down here. At that moment, I knew he did it. Blah blah blah. Okay.
So you quoted this
This
to
is
McDonald.
Yeah, I quoted this to McDonald, and I reproduced it electronically for this.
Mhm.
So I would say that this is, the chances of this being other than completely accurate are minuscule.
Mm-hmm.
So this is
that was the
probably
heart of it,
biggest.
yeah,
This is
yeah.
the nut of what's missing.
Yeah.
And there's another. Where is it now? Oh, another thing. I asked him about this escatrol stuff. He never even asked Jeffrey about this escatrol, which I thought was really shabby journalism. He knew that he was going to say in this book, this theory about how the escatrol made Jeffrey go off the deep end.
Yeah.
But he never even asked Jeffrey that. Why didn't he ask Jeffrey that? Because he figured, he says here, because he figured Jeffrey would just deny it and blah, blah. But also it's because if he asked Jeffrey that, Jeffrey would know then what was going on, you see. So at this point, I mean, there comes a time when you have to come out from behind your little tree and do your deed. And Joe did not come out from behind his tree even sufficiently to ask Jeffrey about the escatrol, even though I'm sure he knew at some point during his proceedings that he was going to make a big deal out of this in the book. Seems to me he at least had an obligation to bounce this off Jeffrey and get his reaction to it. But I guess he was fearful that it would tip his hand and make it impossible for him to get any further cooperation for Jeffrey here. Where's the other part I wanted? I think I have that probably in the section here on the reporting. I'm sure I must have asked him in here about whether or not why didn't he ask him about the escatrol? So it's in here and it's probably in my questions to Jeffrey too. So I wanted to circle a part for you about, I don't want you to, I tried to X that out like some kind of FBI censor. This is a person's name that I did not use in the magazine piece.
Okay. Don't worry.
Okay. Blah, blah, blah. What the hell is that now? I know I have it in here where Joe says that he had come to the conclusion by the time the jury came in. Oh, here's where he says, I did not ask about the escatrol. I'm quoting to Jeffrey now. I asked him why he didn't ask you about all this escatrol stuff, and this is what Joe said. And I did not ask about escatrol beyond a shadow of a doubt that he wouldn't tell me the truth. If I came to him and say, Jeff, I believe he killed his. First of all, he's denying that he killed his family, so he's not going to say, oh, well, you figured it out, Joe. Okay, you win the prize. That's his explanation for why he didn't ask about it. Where was it? Okay, here's the part about the jury. Okay, I said to myself, if I were at that time, by the end of the trial, said to myself, if I were a juror, I would vote to convict, but I did not. But I did not think that these 12 people were going to have to come to the same conclusion that I had come to. Now, here's a case in point of what we were discussing before. I could probably, if I were writing this, take out the second I did not think without putting an ellipsis in there, and I wouldn't feel too terrible about that. Yeah. That's being helpful to him. Yeah. Okay, I would say, but I did not think that those 12 people were all going to have to come to the same conclusion that I had come to. To me, that would be an allowable sort of, you're taking out a verbal hitch. Exactly. Okay, that I might be willing to do. That's a small couple of words. It doesn't change any meaning. It's simply helping the guy who said it by taking out a verbal hitch, like stuff or like that. But
that's no problem.
Okay, that I'll be willing to do. I mean, but otherwise, I don't think that doesn't go to any great extent to change what the guy said. But anyway, so that helps you out with the parts that are missing from I can't imagine what I did with that. It drives me nuts because, as you can see, I'm somewhat anal compulsive.
I'm very impressed with your organization here.
Well, it was going to be a big magazine piece. You want to see? I'm writing a book on the history of Newday. This is the outline for the book. It's a 30,000 word outline. So, you have to be But so I don't know what I did with those when he gave them back to me. I cannot imagine how I lost them, except that I have all this stuff up in the garage now, up in the attic, and it's very difficult to get at it because of the way the attic is built. And I may have just lazily flung it someplace rather than going searching through these boxes to put it back where it belonged. Obviously, I never put it back after the. So there's those two fairly crucial sections missing from here. If you can supply part of it through this
Yeah.
questions in the front, and if you want, you can listen to the tapes. I think the tapes are fairly in the same order. If you wanted to listen to the first parts of the tapes, you could just sort of skim past.
So it's on the tapes, in other words.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well then.
If you wanted to go through the part where we talk about Joe's background, and then you get to Joe, the origin of the book, and the trial stuff, you could do your own transcripts on these two parts. I've supplied you with enough to do that.
Perfect. Then there's no problem.
And I think you could probably do that in a fairly short period of time. As for the rest of it, it's all here. It's all been done. I paid a lady to transcribe the Joe stuff, and I transcribed the Jeffrey stuff myself.
Would you be able, by looking at these, to mark which tape that would be on?
Well, they would be. They're marked. This is McGinnis. Okay, there's tape 1 and tape 2.
Mm-hmm.
Tape 3. There's a second. Oh, it would probably start. Probably this is probably where the whole thing begins. Okay, and then somewhere either on this side or maybe the flip side is where the stuff about the origins and so on and stuff like that starts, about the origins of the book. I don't think it should be all that difficult for you to locate it.
Do you make transcripts of all the tapes you get?
No, not you. It's usually too much about it. You can't.
I don't.
You can't.
I usually listen to them and just take off what I.
Yeah, no, that's normally what I do. In this case, I had the transcript made because I think it was in the process of doing that I decided I was going to write the piece rather than do transcripts. But it's such a complicated case and so touchy that I felt, let me just, in this one case, let me be real, accurate about it and get the transcribing done. And it helped me out to be able to outline the thing. So anyway, so here, take this. Let me go out. I'm going to make you a copy of this piece that appeared in the Inquirer, which came out at about the time of I think it was at about the time of the TV movie.
Right.
This person called me. We talked on the phone for a couple of minutes. I said a little bit in there of what I said to you. I didn't spend an hour and change with this person. And this is the letter that I told you about. So, okay. Punch holes and usually stick on the binder for you. And what the no opportunity to lose it. By the way, I've never acknowledged anytime people have interviewed me about this, which has happened on a few occasions, how I feel about this case until now. I mean, I don't write about it anymore. I'm in the middle of this book. And as far as I'm concerned, the case is over. Jeffrey's going to be away for the rest of the century, at least.
You don't think there's any chance of him just getting on the trial?
Well, he just went through a whole procedure that went all the way to the Supreme Court level.
Yeah.
With the new evidence they produced, and trial judge said it wasn't sufficient, and everybody else along the appellate process agreed. And it's hard for me to imagine what it is that he might dig up at this stage of the game that is going to suffice. I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
You take this. I'll take this. Something.
I was in California last week, talking to other people. His lawyer, Gary Boscliffe. Thanks you very much. It's really very kind of you. And maybe what I will do is sort of express mail all this stuff back to you.
There's no big rush. Whenever you finish with it, I'm sure it's going to take you a while, knowing a New Yorker. So I expect not to see it for a number of months.
Okay, well that's kind of you. And let me give you my address and phone number.
These you can keep. I don't need them back.
Mm-hmm.
The tapes I need back. And did I give you anything else? I gave you the tapes and I need back this binder. The videotapes and the audio tapes. Yeah. Basically what I need back.
For those I will send back to you probably.
No, send them all back in one package whenever you finish with them. I don't regularly look at this stuff anymore. I've sort of put this part of my life behind me.
Well, let me give you my number in case you want something.
MALCOLM.
Right.
I assume, right? What's your phone number again?
It's 759-6039.
6039. And what's your address?
240 East 49th Street.
East 49th. What's the zip?
117.
Oh, so you're right near our offices.
Yeah.
New York Newsday is in the Wang Building, which is at,
Oh, right across the street.
you know where the Wang Building is, right?
Sure.
Could have been the Newsday Building or the Times Mirror Building if we hadn't been stupid about it. But we occupy a lot of space in that building. Even though you're not aware of our newspaper, with your Manhattan centrist notions and your New York Times snobism, it nonetheless exists. And we're going to run the Daily News out of New York, and we're going to run the Post out of New York. And if God is good, maybe we'll run the Times out of New York too.
Would you let me have a copy of your paper and something?
Sure. I'm not saying that our New York product is not yet terrific, but at least in terms of New York City, it beats the hell out of the Times. Gee,
Big. How often do you come out?
how often we come out? Every day.
Every day like this?
Yeah. Daily newspaper. It is huge, and it's because we sell a lot of ads. Newsday makes a lot of money.
Now, the New York Newsday and the Long Island Newsday are different now, or?
Oh yeah, very different. I'll show you. Well, this is today's Long Island paper.
And you work for the Long Island one?
Well, I work for the whole paper, really. But we sell about 150,000 of these every day, which sounds like a tiny amount, but we started with 40,000, not too many months ago. And, it could very well be that someday the News and the Post will be dead, and the only alternative to the Times in New York would be Newsday. And so it's a quite different paper. It's structured for a New York audience, for the people who don't pick it up on the newsstands and so on and so forth. So it's shorter stories, a little bit racier, a little bit more sprightly headlines, but well above the level of News and the Post in terms of responsibility and, care and reporting and all that kind of stuff. So, hey, one of the good parts about the book is that I don't even have to read the New York Times. I happen to believe that I get all the information I need out of Newsday because as a daily journalist, when I have to read all the papers, I do read all the papers. And most of the time, I don't find any time that I need that's not in Newsday.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So now that I'm writing a book that's only about Newsday, I can afford to not have to read the New York Times. And I've run up against the New York Times enough times covering Albany and covering other stories to know that they have more than their share of nitwits and boobs and dummies writing for the New York Times. And just because it appears in those little gray columns does not mean that it is history. I mean, if I was a historian, I'd be very shaky about using the New York Times microphone, knowing some of the bozos that worked there. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was a guy by the name of David Andelman, not to malign David Andelman, but he once covered Long Island for the Times. And at some point, he wrote a piece about the Brookhaven National Lab, which is a pretty big facility, a national nuclear testing facility, all that kind of bullshit, which is out here in Long Island. And the next day, there was a big story on the wires about how he had gotten this 180 degrees out from the truth. And the science editor of the New York Times virtually had to apologize. And yet, this guy Andelman kept rising inexorably through the hierarchy of the time. He was covering Eastern Europe and all this kind of stuff. And while he was covering Eastern Europe, I was severely doubting that Eastern Europe even existed because I saw it under his byline. I'm saying to myself, this cannot be true. This is Andelman writing this, and it's the sort of rabbi system. It's just, if you detect that I don't like the New York Times, you're 100% right. I despise it. I hold it in contempt and loathing. Yet I have a lot of friends who think, oh, their day isn't complete unless they read the New York Times, and they would be intellectual nitwits if they don't read the New York Times.
I find my day is complete if I don't have the Times in the house, but I read very little of it. It's Eddie. My husband makes me say, he reads the Times and the News. Maybe he'll convert to.
Well, if you want to know about New York City, I think it can fairly be said, and it has been said by people outside of our paper, press critics like Jeff Stokes of the Village Voice, that Newsday covers New York City better than the Times does by far, and better than the other two papers for the most part. Mm-hmm. So, we work at covering New York City. That's what's supposed to be the New York Times, not the Ouagadougou Times. But that's what it is. It's mostly reports from foreign nations that most people need not care about.
Well, it's true.
And not that I'm a xenophobe or America firster or anything like that, but, the average person, even the average fairly intellectual person, doesn't really need to know on a daily basis what the price of props are in Ouagadougou today. You could probably learn about that later on. That's something you could pick up as it sifts through or gets into the news magazines. I used to get most of my foreign stuff from the news magazines on the theory that day-to-day developments. I'm not interested enough in foreign news myself to really want to keep up with day-to-day developments. I tend to be interested in state level news, national level news, local level news. But foreign news, I'll pick
Yeah.
up as it those stories that interest me. I'll pick up where I need to. If there's a story that interests me in Newsday about something, and I think maybe the Times might have a better account of it, I would then check the Times. But for the most part, I don't, and that's what Newsday has been trying to do, is to be a fairly complete newspaper now. So you don't have to buy the Times too, in addition to Newsday. We don't have as many foreign bureaus as they do, obviously. You don't have as many domestic bureaus as they do, obviously, and probably never will. But I still think we turn out a pretty good newspaper.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
You say you gave up doing the book when you didn't get a publisher interested. Did you ever consider just doing it and having a complete book, or did you only want to do it to
No,
find
I'm
a
not
publisher?
suicidal. I was. It goes for a lot of these things. I'm up to 516 sides. They have another whole pile over there. Yeah. Look, yeah. So
What
I
I'm
feel that would
asking
take.
Bob about
Yeah, why
how
didn't
come
I?
he was willing to give up all that work he did for it's 10 years, right?
Well, I didn't. I mean, I covered it for Newsday for 10 years. That wasn't wasted, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Part that I did where I worked on the book, I once calculated. I think I might have spent about another 100 hours altogether on the book, just putting together a couple of sample chapters, writing an outline. The reporting that I did for the 1980 magazine piece was helpful in the book stuff because I was able to use that for one or two of the chapters in the book. I turned the 1980 magazine piece into a chapter for the book, one of the sample chapters. In other words, I was writing sample chapters of what I already knew from my reporting, was able to deal with from my reporting, just so I could show the publisher that I could write a book. But again, once I came to the conclusion that A, I was not going to get a publisher, and B, Joe was probably going to write a book that was reasonably accurate, or at least was not coming to the conclusion that Jeffrey was this tortured innocent,
Yeah.
then there was no more sense in my pushing forward. I had all this information, but in order for me to go ahead and write a full book and then just sort of shop it around on a speculative basis, that would have been suicidal on my part. It would have taken me many, 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 many hundreds of more hours to do it, and he had the advantage of having an advance, therefore he could concentrate on it full time. And by that time, I couldn't. I had no significant claim on Jeffrey's time. Jeffrey obviously probably wouldn't talk to me for it. By this time, the Kassabs, now having decided that Joe's book was going to be the only book, had decided they would cooperate with him and talk to him. So I didn't have anything that I could bring to this book other than hard work and reporting on the Long Island stuff. And I knew that it would take me many, many, many hours to do it. And I just didn't have those hours. I was working a real full-time job, 18-hour day job on occasion. I just didn't. Once I saw that it wasn't going to happen, I didn't have much choice but to say, forget it.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Did you feel bad about the following it?
I I was disappointed. It was the first time in my life that I've always wanted in the abstract to write a book, but it was the first time in my life that I've ever had the subject that I wanted to write about, felt very competent about the subject, knew it inside out, and felt that I could actually produce a book. I could have produced a book on this. I honestly don't know whether my book would have sold as well as Joe's would have. I don't think it would have, because I didn't have this paid for insight into Jeffrey's psyche. My book would have probably been a more balanced journalistic book, looking at all different angles of it, not even necessarily coming to any conclusions, although I probably would have had to do that. You couldn't dodge that bullet.
Yeah.
But I think probably, to be honest about it, the way that Joe structured his book is a more commercial way to do it. He had a lot of Jeffrey McDonald in there. Whether you like those sections of Jeffrey McDonald's voice or not, my conclusion is that that's a lot of what makes that book go on a commercial basis.
You just said that, and I'm very surprised by it because that seems so flat and
I think that it's true. I mean, you
there
talk
was
to.
an editor in some of these letters. There's an editor named Morgan
Oh
Esterkamp
yeah.
who wanted to take them out. This is something that
So did you talk to Estrigan?
not yet. I
You
wanna
should talk to him.
Yeah.
Um.
You know where he is? Is he still with the same publisher?
Oh, I've forgotten. I've forgotten. I spoke to him so long ago. I just don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
I lost track of
I'll
him.
track things out.
But maybe you're right. I mean, that's your view of how those things read, but my view is that that's what the titillation stuff that makes this book go as a commercial venture. That's what I would not have had in my book. I wouldn't have had Jeffrey blabbing his guts out on these tapes for my book. And so, to a large extent, Jeffrey provided this book with the fuel to make it successful, I think. And he gave it to Joe.
To that, in that sense, that he's probably more entitled to getting money than another subject might be in a book where, you're just telling the value of story and then all the work is done by the writer. In this case, McDonald actually could claim that he did some of the work with this book. So,
I would say that's true.
Yeah.
I would say that's true. I mean, Joe didn't do any real work on those transcripts other than to go through the transcripts.
And if anything,
And
I would
select
say
them out.
make them a little flatter than
Well,
they could have been.
I
want to study that a little more. I'm not sure about this
Well,
thing here.
I think probably your best bet's to read the whole book so you can get it in context. But I think that
Yeah.
that did help the book a lot. The availability of these sections on Jeffrey's psyche, because that's what makes anybody want to read this book, is try to find out, why would somebody do something like this? What could make a person with that level of talent and intelligence and all of those things going for him do something this terrible? I mean, think about what happened here.
Yeah.
It was a pretty terrible crime to commit. And
It doesn't add up. There's no motive. I mean, this drug psychosis
well,
sort of makes it.
it's hard to know. I mean, that's why the whole question of what goes on in Jeffrey McDonald's head is the utterly central question of the book. And Joe acknowledges that. He says right at the beginning of the book, he set out to find out what went on inside this man's head. That, to anybody's way of thinking, is what the story is. My quarrel with Joe is that he took what I consider to be the easy way out in probing Jeffrey's psyche.
Yeah.
He used Jeffrey's words, almost unedited. You say he chose the wrong part, but he used Jeffrey's words pretty much verbatim as they came out of his mouth.
Right.
And I don't think he did nearly enough work in doing his own reporting, talking to people who knew Jeffrey, talking to people who could tell him little things about incidents that happened in Jeffrey's childhood that shed some light on why he turned out this way. I think that, to that extent, Joe, that was my quarrel with Joe's process on this book in terms of journalism, putting aside the whole question of whether he deceived Jeffrey or not. I would have done a lot more work on that aspect of things than I think Joe did. He said to me he tried, and he did do some of that. My perception of it, reading the book, what came out in the end is that he didn't do enough of it. And so I think that the transcripts in a sense, made Joe lazy, because they were there. They were an available description of what was going on inside Jeffrey's head. But sometimes a person like Jeffrey, if he did this thing, and I'm convinced he did, he is a crazy person. I mean, this is a really crazy person. How is he going to necessarily have a grasp of what was going on inside of his own head? He may be the worst witness.
I would think so.
He may be the worst witness.
His words would all be very defective, and he'd be hiding behind them.
Well, there's a certain amount of self-revelation that goes on in this circumstance that you really can't hold back if you're as crazy as Jeffrey must have been to have done this thing. I mean, a total sociopath.
Do you have a theory about the motive?
I don't think it was anything first of all, it's clear from everything that Jeffrey has said and everything that I know and everything that Joe knows, that Jeffrey's penis should be in the Smithsonian Institution when he dies. I mean, this man was extremely sexually active, extremely promiscuous. And it's not clear whether Colette became aware of that or what. There's a lot of speculation. The night that this happened, she was at a class where they were talking about child psychology. Maybe it had something to do with Jeffrey's treatment of the kids. Maybe there was some challenge to his masculinity. Maybe she said something that challenged his masculinity, and he had some shaky notion of his own masculinity. The Kassabs will try to peddle this notion to you that Jeffrey was gay. He's gay. I never was able to find that out to the extent that I could put it in the book. I'm not sure I would have. I might have mentioned their theory. I don't know. But they had this theory that he was gay, that he was selling sexual favors on the beach at Fire Island
There was a letter from somebody
while running a cab back and forth,
Yeah.
So she may have said something relative to his masculinity. But the point is, whatever the triggering mechanism may have been, what you have to determine is, how had Jeffrey acted in the past? Had Jeffrey displayed the tendency to be violent under fairly mild provocation? And, in my reporting, I found one case where he just leaped over a table and just put the arm around this guy who was at a party where the guy was insulting to the Kassabs or something like that. So it was allegedly a gallant use of his power. But clearly Jeffrey was capable of, really sudden physical violence. And there was a case in high school where he beat up on 3 guys, that a couple of people told me about. And it was those kinds of things, hearing about those kinds of things, that made me think that if you did enough reporting, if you talked to enough people on Long Island, sooner or later you would develop a picture of Jeffrey as a young person that would give you some kind of a clue as to what it was that triggered him, whether he was capable of this level of violence in the past. I wanted to find out a lot more about why he went away to Baytown, whether he beat the crap out of his brother or what. I thought, to me, if I could have established that, that would have been something important, you know.
Yeah.
Joe worked on it. I know he worked on it, but I don't know how hard he worked on it.
Yeah.
You see, he had something I didn't have. In addition to having a book contract and this agreement with Jeffrey, he had this time. When you have an advance like that, you have all this time to put this thing together. And so it gave him the time to go out and do this kind of reporting that I felt was necessary to do it. I was doing it on weekends and nights. You know, I would come down from Albany for the weekend and wander around Long Island for the weekend talking to people about Jeffrey. And so I couldn't always do it. He could have spent months down here. He could have found a house to live in Patchogue for cheap, and he could have spent 3, 4, 5 months doing nothing but that. And it seems to me if I was doing this book, that's exactly what I would have done. Because if you want to find out the secret of what goes on in Jeffrey's head, look at what he did as a young man. Don't just take his word for it now that he's completely gone over the edge.
Exactly. Right.
And so that was a flaw in the book that I
There was that one
quarreled with.
incident that he cited about this son of this woman
Yeah,
that
yeah.
he was having an affair with.
Yeah.
What did you make of that? You think that's
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Well, read the magazine piece. I mentioned that in the magazine piece. I spoke to the woman. You know,
And she corroborated.
she corroborated it to a large extent. Yeah. And so I went to the trouble of doing that. I guessed I knew who the woman was. I've forgotten how I knew who it was. I tracked her
I
down.
remember that now. Yes, you did. Yeah.
And I tracked her down. I
think
spoke
that's
to.
so important. That
Yeah.
really very.
Yeah, this was after
crucial.
he had moved to California and everything else. I mean, that is one thing among many others. One heard stories about him throwing bottles of urine at nurses and stuff like that. You know, I didn't have a chance to do that reporting. It seems to me that that's the kind of reporting Joe should have done more of in this book. I don't know what the hell he did with the time. I really don't. I honestly don't know how he spent all that time. I mean, I'm spending a long time writing this book, but I'm doing a lot of reporting.
Yeah.
And if you're going to be a reporter, you got to practice the craft. You got to go out. You got to talk to people. You got to track things down. You got to talk to dozens and dozens and dozens of people. And it was here to be gotten, I think, on Long Island. I wish I had had the time to go after it more myself. I just got glimmerings enough of it in doing this magazine piece that I felt strongly that it was there.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't pursue it. I didn't have the time anymore. I couldn't give it to this because it wasn't going to turn out to be a book, and therefore I wasn't going to do it just for fun. I couldn't. But Joe could. Joe had the time.
So you were also disappointed in the book that it came out.
Again, I thought overall it was a good read. I knew it was going to sell well, and I thought he did a pretty good job with it. I quarrel with the stuff I just told you about. I quarrel with the fact that he used so much of the grand jury proceedings. I'm saying to myself, Jesus, this guy is like a stenographer. This is writing. You know, for chapter after chapter, for page after page after page, it goes on with the grand jury transcript. Now, I would have used some of that myself. Clearly, you'd have to. But then I'm saying to myself, wait a second now. If he did this, if so much of this book is just this grand jury transcript with a few paragraphs thrown in the middle, I could have done that in a week or a week and a half. That leaves a lot of time. What was he doing with the rest of this time? What was he doing? That's what I question. I mean, I think Joe McGinnis is a talented writer. I wish the hell I had his level of clout and everything else. But those are the two areas where I disagree with the way the book came out.
Yeah.
I probably had done it somewhat differently. But again, keep in mind, I don't think my book would have been nearly as commercial as his. I don't think it would have sold nearly as many copies. It might have sunk under. If I had gotten a publisher to do it, I'd have been surprised if it sold 15,000, 20,000 copies. I'd been real pleased if it sold that many. With Joe's, I don't know how many his sold, but it sold quite a few.
No. Mm-hmm.
And it was successful. But why was it so successful? It was an interesting case. It's a story that really can't miss. It's a story that almost tells itself in a fashion. So even though I quarrel with the way Joe's reporting technique was, but the ultimate result was it's a fascinating book to read. Most people who read it just sort of devoured it because it's a fascinating case you can't miss.
Yeah.
I mean, you really got to commit total journalistic malpractice to miss with this book. And he didn't.
So your book probably would have been a good read too.
Well, I think it probably would have been a good read, but I think what it wouldn't have had it wouldn't have had Jeffrey in it to the extent that Joe's had it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was a crucial element for the saleability of the book.
Mm-hmm.
I think people would have bought the book in the first case anyway, but probably the word of mouth wouldn't have been as good with this book if it hadn't had these Jeffrey sections in it. Joe might quarrel with that. Joe might say that these were extraneous, but obviously he felt they were important. He pursued them and he put them in there. He used them a lot. So
You said I should go see this Morgan Esterton. Why did you feel, why is he a person that's considered?
oh no, you mentioned that. I didn't.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you also.
Oh no, I didn't have any particular feeling about it. I just mentioned I spoke to him at some point.
Yeah.
No, you mentioned I don't think I even knew that he was arguing against the inclusion of Jeffrey stuff. I'm not sure I even knew that myself. But if in
That was
fact that's the
right.
case,
Yeah, that was apparently he's got some reputation for liking books that are lean, and they call him jaws in the industry.
oh yeah,
He cuts and
oh yeah, I don't know that.
he wanted something that was moving faster than.
Well, I've heard that criticism too. I've heard that people say that it wasn't moving quickly enough. I don't know. I mean, bottom line, in fact, I introduced Joe at this is the level of my stupidity here. I introduced Joe at the book and author luncheon that they have at Newsday. Newsday has this luncheon. I think they have one in the spring and one in the fall where they have authors of books come in. And what they do is they give a little spiel about the book, and there are 1,000 or so people in the audience, and they talk about the book and what it was that they did in writing it and all that kind of stuff. I remember they had Irma Bombeck there, I think, that day too, when they had Joe. And I think it's probably a good promotional thing for the book because not only do these thousands of people come in, 1,000 or so people come in, have this lunch, pay $10 or so for the lunch. They listen to the authors. Now, right away, they want to go home and buy the book, right? So right off the bat, that's some sales that ring up from this appearance. And besides that, Newsday usually writes, in the promotion section of the paper or back part of the paper, writes an account of what was said and done. So the people who are out there in the world read about this book too. So that was a good promotion for Joe.
Yeah.
In fact, I might have even suggested to somebody here that they should get Joe.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not sure about that. I can't recall whether I did or whether he had gotten the original idea himself or whatever. So it's a benefit to Newsday, I guess, to have an author here, but it's also a benefit to the author. And I was the one who introduced him. I gave this little speech where I talked about him and I told him how we had competed on the book, but blah, blah, blah. I still felt that came out to be a pretty good book and all.
Well, I think you're remarkably forbearing and generous about it.
Well, life is too short to, I don't like Whitey Herzog. I spend all my spleen on Whitey Herzog, the manager of the Cardinals. So I haven't got enough energy to hate anybody else to that extent, but I mean, that's the one thing I would ask you to be careful of in this. I mean, I don't want it to sound like this is total sour grapes and I'm saying all these terrible things about Joe as a journalist and all these terrible things about his moral choices just because he got this book written and I didn't get this book written. It's true. I was angry at him when I found out about the letters, but I wasn't angry at him before that. Before that, I cooperated with him a lot, helped him out in a lot of ways. I was angry about the letters because I didn't think that he needed to beat up on me like that because I wasn't going to get this book accomplished anyway. Yeah. So that's the only thing I ask you to be a little careful about when you write this piece, is not to give overly the impression that here's this Keeler waiting, in ambush every time he has a chance to jump on Joe McGinnis. I mean, you called me, I didn't call you.
Exactly. No, and I'm struck with that you are more generous than anything else.
Well, that's what he said. He said he didn't think he would have been as nice to me under the circumstances as I was nice to him. I don't know. It's just, you would think that I would be crushed. I'm sort of bemused by the whole thing, that I spent all this energy. It's just typical of my luck. I mean, I have terrible luck when it comes to, a little while ago, everybody was in this refinancing their house mode. Now, you being an apartment dweller probably would know about this, but there was this whole decline in the mortgage rates. And mortgages were down around 7-8%, and we had paid 10.75% for our mortgage, and I had this really hefty mortgage to have to pay. So everybody was refinancing the house, borrow and make a new mortgage at 7 or 8%. Pay off the existing mortgage, you'll still have a nice chunk of cash left over to do with something, take a trip, fix up your house, maybe buy a car, and everybody was getting on his bandwagon. I thought about it for a little bit, and I'm not very good with financial things. Money turns into dust in my hands. And so I didn't get around to it. Finally, I applied. I said, okay, come on, don't be a schmuck. Do it. Everybody else is doing it. It's perfectly legal. It's perfectly fine. This change your mortgage and everything will be cool. Well, the minute I applied for this mortgage, the interest rate went through the ceiling. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. When I moved to Albany, we were in a house living in Coram, and we sold our house to move to Albany so I could become the Albany bureau chief. We lost money on the house. Who loses money selling a house? You buy a house, you sell a house, you make a few $1,000s on the deal. Now you put that towards your next house. We sold the house for less than we paid for it. everything we touch when it comes to money turns to shit, to use an old Roman saying. And so this was just another example of, here's a chance for me to have published a book, maybe made some money, and it didn't come as a gigantic surprise to me when it didn't work out. I just sort of felt in my bones that it wasn't going to work out. I worked
You feel about yourself that you're an unlucky person?
only when it comes to financial kinds of things. I'm just not a very adept person with finances. I'm the kind of person I get a nice salary from Newsday. I like to see it come every week regularly and deposit in my bank. I don't like to have my livelihood dependent upon deal making and maneuvering with publishers and stuff. I'm a very competitive person. I mean, when I'm out to get a story ahead of the time or something like that, watch out. I'm very competitive. But when it comes to something like this, where it's deal making and money making and arranging finances and all this kind of, I don't know, I'm terrible. I'm a schmuck when it comes to this stuff. And so it was not that big a surprise to me when McGinnis ended up coming up with it. So I was able fairly easily, once I saw what his book was going to be like, to get over my whatever anger there might have been, and there wasn't that much anger. I was a little disappointed, but
So did you feel you were kind of out of your league, just with these big boys with their big deals, and
probably.
yeah.
I mean, probably true. I had never published a book. I don't know anything about the publishing industry. Look, now I'm writing a book as a book on the history of Newsday. It's not the subject I probably would have chosen above all others. I think it's going to be an interesting book because I'm a good writer and I'll make it interesting. But
What are you doing it for?
for Newsday, they're paying my salary. Now you say that's another problem. Well, how are you going to write a book about this corporation and be honest while they're paying your salary? It's a good question. I look at it as a testosterone test, see how big a pair I really have. I think I have a big enough pair to do it. And I told him at the outset, I said, look, I'm not going to take 3 years out of my career and write a puff book about what a wonderful place this is. I happen to like Newsday. I think it's a good newspaper. I told you that already. But it's a human institution. We've had our share of foibles and mistakes, and I intend to write about it, But it's kind of typical of me that the book I end up writing as my first book is a book where I don't have to worry about these publishing deals and everything else. They came to me and said, hey, we think you'd be the best person to write this book. We'll continue to pay your salary. Whatever your expenses are, we'll pay them. And
you're not. This is the work you're now doing.
This is it.
Yeah.
This is what I do.
Yeah.
And it's going to be for a couple of 3 years. And I don't screw around. When I'm doing a book, I do the book. I'm going to be having 500 interviews.
Are you enjoying it?
Yeah, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
Are you finding interesting things out? So
Oh yeah,
drama story. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Like institutions are.
Oh sure. That's why I agreed to do it, despite that original, reluctance I had to put myself in this, you could call it a conflict of interest situation, I guess. I mean, it's kind of funny I'm talking about Joe's conflict. I guess I have a big conflict too, don't I? But it really depends on, depends on me. And I gave them a memo at the outset. I said, look, here are several things, for example, that I will have to say in this book in order for it to be an honest book. Read them and gulp and tell me whether you still want me to write this book. And they said, okay. And I still have that memo.
Are you going to, are they going to have to, sorry. Will they publish whatever you submit, or are you under some kind of review process?
Well, they'll be editing. But I have confidence in the fact that in knowledge there is power. By the time I finish doing my reporting, I will know more about the history of Newday than anybody, any single person. And I will know some of these things pretty cold. And there's no way they're going to keep it out of the book.
Yeah.
If I want to put it in the book, and it's important to me, I'll get it in the book.
They are publishing it, and will they then distribute it, or was there a New
No. What the
it?
deal is, I told them, look, I'm not going to take 3 years out of my life to write a book that's going to be published by Vanity Press, okay? The deal is we get a trade publisher to publish this book. Normal trade publisher, Random House, Doubleday, whoever they get, okay? It's probably a low-risk venture for most publishers because realistically what will happen is they'll probably print 15, 20,000 copies of this book. Newsday will buy back a whole big pile of them for their own, some of them they'll give out to people. They'll sell them at discounted stores and stuff. So it's not, I have no illusions that this book is ever going to appear on drugstore shelves. I guarantee you that. There will be no paperback. There will be no movie. There will be no sitcom. But I think I can make an interesting book, and I think it can be, there were some interesting journalistic issues raised by Newsday. Newsday has led the way in a lot of things. The history of investigative reporting is different because of Newsday. On the other hand, Newsday editors have done some incredibly venal things over the years, which I'll have to talk about also. Journalistic ethics is a part of the book. So anyway. Hello?
Hi. Give me a minute. Oh, yeah. Can I check your manual paper a moment?
Sure.
Yes.
You want to take it though? There might be a battle.
No,
Oh,
I don't
okay.
wanna take it.
Might be a small homicide. Okay. They're going out of style, you know, so one has to hang on to any samples of them you can get. Well, they must be looking for a guy who typed the ransom note.
But I hold on to I have an old Office Royal that I
Oh, yeah?
hang on to. I'm having trouble getting ribbons right now.
Oh, yeah. Do you type your stories on typewriters still?
Thank you.
Or I can't take care. I can't write on a typewriter anymore.
That's well,
This is it. This is how I write. But believe me, it's like night and day. I mean, you probably say, "Oh, I have to have the feel of the keys on my hand." It's really bullshit. Once you've gotten used to typing on a computer, you're a better writer because there's no longer any disincentive to fixing up your work. I mean, when you're writing on a piece of paper, you know, you get to the bottom of the page and say, "Oh shit, you know, I should have put that paragraph up at the top of the page, down at the bottom of the page, or I should have moved this whole phrase down to here." And you know, you do it with a pencil and it gets all slopped up and messy and blah blah blah. And so there's a disincentive for you to do polishing. There's a disincentive for you to really make this the best possible piece you can. With the computer, there's no disincentive at all. You just push a button, you move whatever you want around to wherever you want it, and it takes seconds. It's not messy, and you know, you could copy whole sections of things. You know, when I have transcripts that have been made by my colleague here, and when the time comes to write, I have those transcripts. I can just plug them into this whole thing, just pull them out. You know, so writing on a computer has its definite benefits. It also enables you to organize things a lot better. You know, when you're doing an outline, you're doing a 300,000 word book, you got to do a big outline. And so it's easier on a computer. You can plug things in different places, move them around. On paper, you can't. I used to use index cards for this with downloadable. And, you know, that was the best system I had available. But this is much better than index cards because you have a lot more flexibility to things.
well, the brush. So far, the typing part, all that mechanical stuff, that's the part that I like the best. I mean, the writing part is the hard part, the thinking.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas the typing, that's kind of, you know.
But this makes that part, it makes the typing part easier. No, you don't really have to do a whole page over again.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I don't know. I put in an awful lot of time instead of retyping the same thing and having a division of work. I mean,
yeah, but if you use the same amount of time actually working on the thing instead of retyping the vast majority of it, that's going to stay the same as it was the time before. When you retype something, I know from experience, you're changing a word here or two on a page, but basically most of that page is coming out the way it was a few minutes ago, except that you spent a lot of time on it. You can spend that time reporting or having a wine and cheese party or something. If you add up over a piece like this, save you hours.
I have the wine and cheese party. I think there's a sort of, for me anyway, there's a small amount of time that I could spend really thinking and really producing. The rest was just kind of, you know, whatever else you do.
Yeah.
But don't you agree that there's just not an infinite amount of energy that one has in a day where one is doing one.
No, I try to structure myself because I know when I'm best. I'm best around 5 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
I mean, I used to come when I was the editor of the magazine. The only thing that kept me sane while having to be an administrator and run all these people's lives and sign their vouchers and deal with personnel crises and all these other things you have to do when you're the editor of the magazine is I would write pieces. I wrote that McDonald piece while I was the editor of the magazine. And I would do my reporting, and I would go down, and I'd spend a couple of days actually away from the office doing reporting. But I would do the writing 5 o'clock in the morning. I'd come in at 5 o'clock, spend from 5 o'clock to 10 o'clock writing the piece, and then 10 o'clock the editor is in. Everybody would show up, and I'd have to start solving goofy personnel problems. And I'd leave about 7:30 at night, go home, go to sleep about 10, get up at 4 o'clock the next morning so I could be back here at 5. And you do that for a couple of weeks to write the piece. You know, so I know that the time I can write is early in the day. I don't try to write late in the day. I'm not I could stay up late, but I don't do my best work late in the day. I tend to do it best early in the morning. So I try and structure myself around it. Anyway, did you plan to call Kassabs at some point in all of this? I have to believe that Freddie and Mildred are really beside themselves about Jeffrey getting $300,000. I gotta believe they're pissed.
I guess maybe I should talk to them.
You want me to give you their number?
Would you?
Yeah, they just sent me a change of address card. They just moved to Florida. They had been in New Jersey, but tell them I gave you, tell them I gave you the number, and because I felt that they would want to have something to say about this.
Well, he testified
At the trial? It seems to me if you write a piece involving Jeffrey, you have to talk to Freddie. Well, it's Alfred G.
Were you asked to be in this case at all by either side?
No. I'm just as happy I didn't. You know, I'm just as happy I didn't. Well, now this is sort of a purgative. I can sort of get this whole thing out of my system now and not have to think about it anymore until your piece comes out. Then my purgative may be coming to beat you up.
I hope not.
I rather doubt it, but I expressed my views.
Oh, the
clearly.
address is here. I'll send you the last book I did.
Okay. Oh, you did a book on what?
On a man named Jeffrey Mason, who was first a Sanskrit, and he became a psychoanalyst.
Was it a biography of him?
No, it's a kind of narrative of a episode.
Yeah.
Involving him and some
Yeah.
people in the psychoanalytic society.
Okay. Okay.
If I interview with somebody who
What's your maiden name, by the way?
Win.
Yeah, okay. I asked because you have a certain physical resemblance to somebody I know. So I wonder if
My
there's a.
sister possibly?
No.
Win?
No, I don't know Mary Wynn. Somebody I know looks probably, how old are you now? About 45, 46, something like that?
I'm 52.
52, okay. Somebody I know who's a little younger than you she'll look like you in about 3 or 4 years.
Oh,
So anyway. All right. Well, I hope that this has been helpful to you. And I hope that you
Very,
will keep in
very.
mind that this is not totally outrage and you'll treat it